to reply. The questioner is entitled to ask one supplementary question, which must be only about the reply given to the original question. No further question.
Sorry, Chair, sorry to interrupt your flow, but this live stream is not streaming apparently.
Well,
just to advise, it should be streaming now.
Hello,
Okay.
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that, Chair. Carry on.
Okay. Right. The questioner is entitled to ask one supplementary question, which must only be about the reply given to the original question. No further questions or debate are allowed once the councillor has replied to the supplementary question.
Sorry, Chairman, before we call upon the member of the public, Councillor Whitton has his hand raised. I don't know if that's for something.
Councillor Whitton, unmute.
Yes, Alan Pearson can't get in. He's got the ID and the password. Somebody isn't loosening him in. He now wants the phone number so he can get through by phone. The host hasn't let him in.
Oh, sorry. I'll call him now, Chairman, and let him have the dialing number so he can get on.
They're calling you now.
Anyway, I'll carry on with the question from the member of the public. I call upon Mick Davey to ask his question.
They're calling you now with the phone number.
Can I come in now, Chairman?
Yes, you can, Mike.
Right. Councillor Josh Newbury, question for Councillor Josh Newbury. Does the closure of Lee Hall coal mine on the 25th of January 1991 and the following closure of the Rugeley A power station in 1994 and Rugeley B power station in the 8th of June 2016 have a significant health benefits for the population of Rugeley and the surrounding villages? For example, people with pulmonary diseases, for example, asthma and COPD, and could an inquiry be set up to examine the benefits and the problems of Rugeley and the adjacent villages?
Thank you very much. I now call upon the Environment and Climate Change Portfolio Leader, Councillor Newbury, to respond. Councillor Newbury.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chair. And evening, Mike. Thank you very much for your question. Obviously, this is a very serious issue which cuts across many government bodies. And because of that, it will require a multi-organisation response because this council can't provide a full answer on its own. Specifically, we're going to need some advice and specialist expertise from the public health team at Staffordshire County Council, and also some data from Cannock Chase Clinical Commissioning Group. But we passed your question on to them on Wednesday, the 13th of January, and we're just waiting on their response. But I'll outline what I can from our side as a council now. So the Director of Public Health at the County Council will hopefully assist us in obtaining some statistics on mortality associated with what's called PM 2.5. So that means particulates that measure less than 2.5 micrometers. So we're talking about very fine matter, which is similar in size to bacteria, and that can cause many of the issues you've mentioned there, including COPD, asthma, etc. So the council will also need to examine air quality monitoring data going back to the 90s, which we don't hold in-house at the moment. In terms of the effects on health, it's difficult to say with absolute certainty what benefits there might have been for Rugeley and the surrounding villages, because those fine particles can be carried over very long distances. Emissions like that tend to be measured on a regional level, so it's difficult for us to kind of hone that down to a community or ward level. But I think we can say that the closure of the mines and power station will almost certainly have had a positive effect on those emissions. But there are many other different sources of fine particle emissions. So diesel vehicles, for example, particularly older diesel vehicles, they emit quite a lot of particulate matter. And we know that the number of vehicles in Rugeley would have increased over the years. Fine particles can also come from smoking, from domestic wood burning and things like log burners. new businesses that might have set up in Rugeley in the last 30 years, and even the burning of scented candles in homes. All of that can increase those types of emissions. So Rugeley might have benefited from the closure of the mines and the power station, but that progress could be at the same time counterbalanced by those other sources that I mentioned. Our officers have been able to review some data from 2014 to 2018 relating to deaths amongst adults over the age of 30, which we can attribute to that particulate matter. So in our district, those deaths accounted for 4.6% of overall deaths. That's slightly above the Staffordshire average of 4.4%, slightly below the England average of 5.2%. And I've asked officers to liaise with colleagues in partner agencies to see if we can identify any other information that might be available to us. We'll be writing to you separately, Mike, with any findings that we have that could assist us in answering that first part of your question more fully. As for the second part of your question, we'll maybe need a little bit more detail from you regarding what you'd want an inquiry to look at specifically. Obviously, you've mentioned certain illnesses this evening, but it may be that a number of different organisations need to be involved with that. And it might be the case that this council isn't able to provide a leading role in that, just depending on kind of what the specific topic would be. But happy to discuss that with you further following this meeting. What I can say is that we as a council are aiming to be carbon neutral by the year 2030, and to facilitate that work, we're currently developing a costed action plan, which will hopefully help us to achieve that. And obviously efforts to tackle the emissions that are causing climate change will clearly also improve air quality as well. So the two objectives will dovetail. For example, encouraging people to switch to zero emission vehicles, encouraging cleaner industrial processes in Rugeley and the rest of the district, and raising more awareness of emissions in the home as well. All of those things will improve the quality of the air we breathe and our wider environment as well. So I hope that goes some way to answering your question, Mike. I acknowledge that there's still a lot of information we need to find out, but as I said, I'm happy to carry on the discussion, and we'll be in touch with you when we've got further data available to us.
Thank you very much. Just a question, I have a supplementary question to ask of the portfolio leader.
Chairman, I'm afraid I didn't hear anything. I've got technical difficulties. I couldn't hear it. So is it possible to send that answer by email?
Yeah, if I may, Chair, we'll obviously write to Mike with a formal response, which will set out everything that I've mentioned tonight, and hopefully we'll soon have some more data which will be useful. We'll flesh out the response a bit more, so happy to put that all in writing to Mike.
Are you happy with the answer, Mike?
I couldn't hear a thing there, Chairman. Is it possible for me to phone Councillor Newbury after the meeting so they can... I'm ever so sorry, but being a bit mutt and Jeff, it's a problem.
Well, Councillor Newbury has actually asked you can contact him after this meeting.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine with me.
Huh?
Okay, Mike.
I can ring him after, can I?
Yes.
Okay, then. Thank you ever so much, and I do apologise.
Quite all right, no problem. Thank you very much.
Cheers, then.
Item 5 on the agenda.
Okay, mate.
Yeah. Chairman's announcements and correspondence.
Just chairman's announcements there, mate. Yeah.
Pardon? As members are aware, on the 7th of January, the Council's Principal Parks and Open Spaces Officer, Kevin Yates, sadly passed away. Kevin worked for the Council since 2015 and played a key role in many important projects, such as the regeneration of Ensford Park. He also worked closely with many different groups and communities in the district. It is fair to say that Kevin was known for his friendliness and willingness to help. Nothing was ever too much trouble for him, and I know that he will be greatly missed by his colleagues and friends at the Council, as well as those he came into contact with across the district. Our thoughts are with his friends and family at this very difficult time, and I would like to ask all members to join me in a minute's silence to show their respects. Thank you. I would like to say to all members, thank you very much. I now move on to item 6 on the agenda, the leader's announcements and correspondence. I call upon the leader of the council to make any announcements. Councillor Adamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everyone. First of all, as members may be aware, I'm Chair of Governors at Staffordshire University Academy. The Academy, like many other schools, like all the other schools, is taking great steps to ensure the safety of students and staff at this time. And they have prepared a short video to show the procedures that they follow, which should bring some reassurance to everyone that everything's been done to keep students and staff safe. And I've got their permission to show this. So Matt, if you can show the video, please.
Fingers crossed my technology behaves itself, so we shall see.
Welcome to our lateral flow testing centre at Staffordshire University Academy. Students and colleagues will enter and they will come to the registration desk here, at which point they will be handed a registration card and a barcode. They will take this over to one of our test operators and hand it over, and they will then be given a swab and the following instructions.
If you would like to go to one of our testing bays, where there's some hand sanitizer and some tissue, you need to blow your nose. What you need to do with the swab is to use the mirror to locate the back of your throat, the tonsils, where you'll need to rub those for 10 seconds, okay, avoiding your cheek and your tongue. You'll then need to remove it and insert it at one nostril, where you basically wipe it around 4 to 5 times, trying to get the lining of the nostril, then remove it, and if you could bring it back over to me, that would be fantastic.
They will then come over to one of our stations where they will see instructions on what they need to do, and there is also a mirror. They will use the swab as directed, and when completed, they will take it back over to the test operator, at which point they will place it into one of these, and the test operator will conduct the test. So to do so, they move the swab around in the solution. Using the pipette, they will then put the solution into one of the testing devices, as is being demonstrated here. The test operator will then take the testing device, along with the barcodes, over to our results centre. And they will begin a stopwatch for 30 minutes. At 30 minutes, the results will be read and inputted onto the NHS test and trace system, as well as our own internal spreadsheet. If the test does come back as positive, then the person who is positive will be given a PCR test to take home and complete the test there.
Right, thank you, Matt. As you can see there, the measures the schools, that's the academy's taking. I'm sure other schools and districts are taking very similar measures to ensure the safety of staff and students. So I hope it provides some reassurance to parents in the area. Sadly, the pandemic continues and the figures for our district continue to be stubbornly high. The figure from the County Council today for Cannock Chase is 535.9, which is per 100,000, which is a slight decrease in what it has been, but it's still very high, and it's well above the Staffordshire average of 425.1. In fact, in this district, we're the third highest in the county, and we have 9 wards that are considered to be hotspots, which is really is a worry. So more than half our wards are hotspots for COVID. On the right side, the vaccination program is now going well. We had some initial glitches, but it's going well now. And the CCG have told me that they'll complete the vaccination of all the over 80s and the residents and staff of care homes this week, which is excellent news and really well done to them. And they intend to vaccinate frontline social care staff next and use any spare vaccines that's happened each day, as it happens occasionally, to vaccinate care staff as well. So I've asked the County Council to provide the names and staff and contact numbers of all these frontline staff that they can be done as speedily as possible. A lot of our residents go to the Roman Way for the vaccinations, and some of your members may be aware that there were major traffic problems last night. In fact, the A5 was blocked, Longford Island was gridlocked, and because so many people turned for that. Vaccinations at the same time. I understand this is partly due to some people turning up early, and it really does bode well for the future. If we can all work together to fight the pandemic, we can work together to deal with other health issues and other issues here in Staffordshire. So it really does well. One final point from last night's meeting is about mental health. The pandemic has been going on some 10 months now. It's affecting the mental health of a huge number of people. So I urge members to highlight this issue and the help available. Here in Staffordshire, we're lucky we've got excellent mental health services. There's a 24-hour mental health helpline, which is 0808 800 2234. And remember, everybody, it's okay not to be okay. If anybody is, including members here, our staff, our residents, if things are not right, get in touch. Help is available. I'd ask all members and all staff here to please encourage anyone who is suffering any mental health issues at all, please get them to go and help them to get help. There's no need to suffer at home and alone. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I now move on to item 7, questions received under Council Procedure Rule 8. No questions have been received. Item 8 on the agenda, recommendations referred from Cabinet and committees, etc. No recommendations have been referred to Council. Item 9 on the agenda, 4 motions have been received under Council Procedure Rule 6 for today's meeting. I shall take each motion in the order as they appeared on the agenda.
I have Councillor Pearson on the phone. Is it okay for him to talk through my phone onto the monitor?
I don't see no problem with that. Can I just present this first, Paul, before Alan comes onto the phone?
Okay.
I call upon the community Safety and Partnerships Portfolio Leader, Councillor Pearson, to present his motion to Council. Councillor
Go ahead.
Pearson.
Paul, we can't hear him.
They can't hear you, Alan. I've got it right on top of it, mate. Right.
Paul, can you put your phone on speaker?
Pardon?
Can you put your phone on speaker?
Mine is on speaker, Chris.
It already is, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah.
It's a point of order, if I may, Chair. I understand some members struggle with the technology, and we help to support them through this. But if somebody is joining by phone, then we should be able to not just hear them as we're struggling with, but can we confirm they can hear us as well? Because this is an important issue, and I'm sure Councillor Pearson in this instance would want to know that. And from a legal point of view, only monitoring officer, are we okay doing it this way?
Matt?
He can hear you, loud as clear as a bell, but it's not coming through on my phone.
You can hear me.
Chairman, if Councillor Pearson is struggling, another member may present the motion on his behalf.
Another member might present it on your behalf, Alan.
Chairman, can I ask Councillor Tony Johnson if he's an ex-miner? He knows an awful lot about this. Tony, would you be happy to move it?
Yeah. Can Councillor Johnson do it?
Councillor Johnson, are you prepared to put the motion to Council? Can you unmute first?
Yeah, yes, Chair. I will propose a motion. I was prepared to second it. However, I will propose the motion.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I'll do that on behalf of Councillor Alan Pearson.
As I said, I will remind the Council, as Councillor Pearson is having problems, Councillor Johnson is putting forward his motion on behalf of Councillor Pearson. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, may I say that I'm quite pleased now to be proposing this motion. I was quite pleased to be seconding it at one stage. However, as the last of 4 generations of my family to work in the mining industry, I might also add that I'm extremely proud that the members on of the Labour group have made a significant donation to the Miners Memorial Fund, where a permanent monument will be erected within the National Arboretum at Alnwick. So I think that's important that we remember the contribution that the miners have made to the history and to the social fabric of our community. Chair, at the council meeting on the 5th of April 2017, the following motion was passed, and I think I proposed it, as if I remember, that the Cannock Chase District Council views with great concern the gross injustice whereby the Treasury receives 50% of the surplus from the Mine Workers Pension Scheme, accumulating to over £3 billion to the present date. This money has been taken and continues to be taken from former coal mining communities such as our own that can least afford it. The money removed from the pension scheme is vastly out of proportion to the risk covered by the Treasury. This council requests that the Public Accounts Committee conduct an independent scrutiny of the extremely unfair arrangement and calls on the MP for Cannock Chase to take up the case for further action within Parliament. And this is what the motion actually said. I'm very sad to say that little or no notice has been taken by the Treasury and the Public Accounts Committee or the MP for Cannock Chase upon this motion. Therefore, I submit the following motion for consideration to this authority. The council views that with vastly increasing concern, the ongoing pillaging, and that's not too strong a word, the ongoing pillaging of the Mine Workers Pension Scheme. The Treasury is still in receipt of 50% of the scheme's surplus. It is now stated by the Justice for Mine Workers Pension campaign that the total which has been taken out now has reached 4.2 billion, and I think that's a conservative estimate, Chair. This has been taken from former mine workers, their widows, and our communities, very much such as our own. There is no justifiable reason why the Treasury takes 50% of the surplus when the risks are so low. To illustrate this, the Labour Party 2019 election manifesto proposed that it would only take 10%. So it would be 90% in favour of the miners' pension scheme and 10% in favour of the government. Therefore, the Council requests that the MP for Cannock Chase write to the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to ask why so many of her constituents continue to be plundered by the government at a time when their lives are so hard and the money is very much needed. Can I just say, Chair, from a personal point of view, this is not a political motion. There was a Labour government in power between 1997 and 2010, which did little to address this injustice. I would probably call it an alleged Labour government, but others might disagree. But as I say, that Labour government, those Labour governments under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown did little to address this injustice. Thank you, Chair. I so move.
Is there a seconder for the motion?
I'll second that.
Thank you very much. Does anyone wish to speak on the motion? No. Does anyone?
Councillor Lyons is indicating, Chairman, and Muckley.
Councillor Lyons.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd just like to begin by saying Councillor Johnson mentioned the National Memorial, which is by the Chaps. I think it's a fantastic memorial, and I'm proud to say that we all support it as well. With regards to the issue in question here, the issue within the motion, I think it's important to have sort of, you broadly explained some of the issues, but to go back and look at it from a historical point of view. I think we might have members of the public watching that perhaps aren't familiar with it. So just to explain it a little bit more, the agreement was reached back in 1994, which I know is a considerable long time ago. I'm going to keep talking regardless of the eye rolling and the smirks, because I think it's incredibly unprofessional, and I think I should be allowed the opportunity to speak. So at that time, the trustees felt that they worked with the government to reach the agreement, and at that time they felt that it was a reasonable agreement, and basically in cash terms it ensured that regardless of what the investments were, their pensions wouldn't fall within cash terms. Now at that time they looked at the surplus, so there's two aspects to the mine workers pension, as Councillor Johnson will be aware. There's the guaranteed aspect and there's the bonus aspect. In terms of the surplus, they looked and they said that if members were to get a greater share, then the trustees would have to revisit their investment strategy. And basically, like any investment strategy, they'd have to become more risk adverse, which in turn could lead to lower returns. And because of the nature of the pension, that would actually mean that the bonuses were lower. So that's why the agreement was reached. Since then, as Councillor Johnson acknowledged, the Labour government have looked at it, so it's not a political issue. This is an issue that has been reconsidered by governments of all political parties and all colours. And at the time, Brian Wilson, who was the Labour minister, said that it wasn't appropriate to revisit it, simply because there were significant falls in the stock market, and he didn't want to risk there being lower bonuses for members of the scheme. Move forward a bit, 2009, it was revisited again, and the government at that time agreed to relook at the arrangements. In response to that, the chair of the trustees, so the Mine Workers Pension Scheme, is managed by a body of trustees, which are ultimately accountable and responsible for representing the interests of parties. They looked at it, and they were happy, and they actually wrote to all members to say that while a change in the surplus share would be welcome, without strong investment returns and a large surplus, the investment bear with me. Without a large surplus, the impact would be incremental, not transformational. So at that point, the trustees looked at it, they looked at the two different options on the table, and they actually preferenced securing the bonus payments rather than increasing the surplus. That was their favoured option. In response to that, they then they were the ones that actually drafted the proposals, submitted them to government, and by then it was a Conservative minister, and he accepted those proposals, fully supported them, and agreed to move forward with that. Now, the trustee of the scheme at the time, actually wrote to all members to explain that he was delighted by that support. So I think my issue here is with the wording of the motion. So it was looked at again. It's only 3 months ago. So that was back in June last year. Only 3 months ago, an agreement was reached. And the chair of the trustees again wrote to all members of the pension scheme saying he was delighted with the report on behalf of the trustees that discussions had concluded and changes to protect members' bonuses, which were proposed, agreed and implemented by the trustees. So he then reported back to the trustees that the government had reconsidered the scheme, accepted their proposals at a time. Now you say in the motion here that our MP did nothing. We're forgetting to mention that that was at a time that our MP was actually a member of the cabinet. So I think it's wholly unacceptable. Now, I don't disagree. Like any agreement, it should be reviewed, and that would absolutely be the right thing to do. So periodically review and make sure, importantly, it meets the needs of all the members. I'm not against that. What I am against is this misleading language within this. So actually, you know, my granddad was a miner. I'm from that background myself. So I'm not wholly, you know, I'm aware of the difficulties, but I think language such as plundered, Councillor Johnson says that it's not too strong a word. Maybe not, but what it is completely unprofessional and unnecessary. If this isn't a political issue, why do we need to be unprofessional about it? This shouldn't be about political point scoring. As we've mentioned earlier, it's been reconsidered by governments of all different colours. It should be about reaching a fair agreement for miners' families and people within our community. The trustees are accountable. They put forward the proposals. That was agreed. There was a letter of support to members. So whilst I agree with keeping the proposal under review, and I'm not against that, I'm not against revisiting the proposal, what I am against is it being turned by this council into a political point scoring thing when it's absolutely not. That's not right. That's not in our residents' best interests. So to use the language used here, to say that our MP has had no involvement or movement since 2017 is completely wrong. It's a lie, and that's not right. We need to work together and be professional for residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Muckley.
Very much, Chair. I am also concerned about some of the inflammatory language, but the basis of the motion I'm very happy with. I do have a couple of very small amendments to put forward, if I may. Very, very small. The first is the second bullet point of the motion. I just want to change that to say national justice for mine workers rather than justice for mine workers.
Yeah.
Just because that's the name of the organisation. I just wanted to make sure it's capital N, capital J, capital M. It's pernickety, but that's what I do, sorry. And then the final bullet point, it says Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. Again, that should be in capital letters for work and pensions. But my final part of my amendment is that I would like to ask that we write a letter as well. We can't just rely on the MP to do this. This is something that if we feel that, you know, we want to put forward, and this is a strong mining community. We've already heard from two people with a mining background. My grandfather was a miner as well. You know, this is important for our history and you know, who we are. So as councillors, I would like to write a letter as well. So I would like to amend the motion for those two small typos and to say that I would like the managing director to write on behalf of the council in the same vein, asking them to look into this.
Well, before I move to Councillor Brian Jones, Ian, can that be done in the motion?
Chairman, if I could ask Councillor Johnson and Adamson whether they would agree to adopt that in the motion.
Through you, Chair, I think that would be more than reasonable. And thank Councillor Muckley for correcting the slight typos. And I think a letter from the council would be most appropriate.
Councillor
I'll leave
Adamson?
Councillor Adamson to add his views there.
I'm quite happy with that as well, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brian Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I say the real import of what about this motion, I should declare that I started my working life at 15 years of age down a coal mine. The next brother to me spent, I think, 12 years down Littleton Colliery as well, and my father was a coal miner. So mining runs through my family. I hope that no one in this chamber here would begrudge coal miners getting a fair deal on their pension. Of course, we would all want that. In fairness to Councillor Johnson, he had to step in and say this, but I suspect he felt a little bit embarrassed that he had to put that caveat in at the end about it not being political. In fairness, he's had to step in, so I'll excuse that. But the question should be, why wasn't it in there in the first place? And as Councillor Lyons has already alluded to, some of the words that was used, I won't repeat all of them, but plundered by the government. If that's not political, I don't know what is. Gross injustice. It's really all about saying this motion is about saying that we care about the miners and the government doesn't. And Councillor Lyons has articulated beautifully the process that's gone through. And in fairness to Councillor Johnson, he did allude to successive governments, although I think he perhaps knew that we were going to mention that too. So let's just be clear on this, that I'm sure we all support our miners and their widows getting a fair deal, but please don't make it political. I think the leader of the council, Councillor Adamson, mentioned at the last meeting that we should be a responsible opposition. I cannot knock the ball squarely back in your court and say you should be a responsible administration. And I'd like to, in closing, add a further amendment that perhaps we write to the trustees to actually ask them to look further into this, because it appears to me that they're best placed to fight the corner of the coal miners on this. And that's, I would like to put that forward as an amendment, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I'll
Chairman, do you want to check whether that amendment would be acceptable to Councillors Johnson and Adamson?
Yeah. Would that be acceptable to Councillor Johnson and Councillor Adamson? That they're right to the trustee?
Chair, unfortunately, I would not be willing to accept that amendment because it wouldn't wash. The trustees are in dialogue and with some opposition to the government representatives overseeing the pension scheme at the moment. I've got some further information which I would like to make available at the end, Chair, but I'm unfortunately writing to the trustees who actually share the views which I have expressed on behalf of Councillor Pearson, that they use much stronger terminology, and my former colleagues use much stronger terminology than pillaging. They talk about robbery, Chair, and it's not about government. It's about governments of both types, of Labour and Conservative, which have failed to address this issue, and it is robbery. And to be accused of unprofessional language, unprofessional seems to be the in word at the moment, and then say that it's lies, I would say that probably robbery and plundering are quite less emotive language than lying. So, Chair, no, I can't accept that amendment from Councillor Jones, as much as it's well-intentioned, Chair.
Chairman, in that case, we have an amendment that's been proposed and we'd need a seconder to know where to go next. Does anyone want to second it or not?
Shall I take the vote on the amendment?
Whether someone wants to second it or not, Chairman.
No. Does anyone want to second?
I'll second it, Chair. Mike Sutherland.
Mike Sutherland.
Chairman, the discussion is now on the amendment and whether we will be accepting the amendment.
Is now on the amendment. Brian, can you just repeat it to everyone and then I will take the vote?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that in addition to the things that have been mentioned, that we also write to the trustees to urge them to engage with government representatives for a better deal for the miners.
Have you got that, Ian?
Yeah, I don't know if Councillor Martin has indicated, I don't know if she wishes to speak on the amendment before we vote on that.
Councillor Martin.
No, I wanted to speak on the, well, I wanted to say something about Councillor Lyons' comments, but if we're talking about the amendment, my comments don't.
Well, I'd like to say, can I take the vote on the amendment and then bring Councillor Martin in after?
Sure, so we just need to discuss the amendment because we'll go to a vote and decide whether that becomes the substantive motion or not.
Right. Well, you've all heard the motion of Councillor Brian Jones. Can I now go to the vote?
So Councillor Woodhead and Hewitt are indicating, I don't know if that's on the amendment, Chairman.
Councillor
Whether it's
Woodhead,
right to the trustees.
the amendment?
Yes, it relates to the amendment, Chair. If I may, it's more an inquiry, I guess, and there'll be people on this call that are more informed on this subject than I. I'm not from a mining background, but I'm aware of the plight of miners' pensions, and indeed WASPy women as well. And pensions seems to be a recurring theme of injustice for our older people. I just can't quite understand, and maybe Councillor Tony Johnson would speak to the amendment as part of the conversation in a moment, because it's just to help me determine how to vote on this. Why we wouldn't write to the trustees, I don't see where the disadvantage is. The more people that know about this and know our views on it, I'd have thought the better. So I just sort of, I don't understand what the objection is. And I know, Tony, you spoke a little bit about it as you didn't accept that amendment, but it wasn't quite clear to me. So if it's yourself and others can explain that a little bit more, then I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Right, then, before I move to Councillor Hewitt, Councillor Johnson, can you explain to anyone regarding...
Yeah, just to give you a little bit of background on how the agreement was reached in the first place, and I know that certainly Councillor Christine Martin will be able to bear me out on this. In 1994, the trustees and the negotiations which took place regarding privatisation of the coal industry and thereby the guarantee for the pension scheme consisted of 5 representatives of the government and senior management and 5 representatives from the 2 mining unions, 1 representative being from the UDM. The proposal for the 50-50 split was proposed by the government in 1994, which I think probably was John Major's government, and thereby carried on a majority of 6-4, with the UDM representative voting on behalf of the government and the management of the trustees. The 4 NUM representatives voted against. The trustees at the present time are engaged with government to get a fairer split. They are in constant dialogue with government regarding this. However, they are not having any sort of success. They are very much aware of the grassroots element which exists, which is anti the 50-50 split and seeks a fairer remuneration on behalf of miners, their families and their communities. Writing to the trustees is pushing at an open door. They are already fully aware of the injustice which exists and are fighting against it. Thank you, Chair.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Woodhead?
Yes, thank you. It gives some context to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you, Chair. I found this interesting. I come from a working class background, but not a mining one. But I've lived in Cannock for 40 years, so I'm well aware and very proud of the mining heritage. And of course, like us all, we all know an awful lot of miners. Fairness for mining is absolutely vital, Mr. Chair. And overall, I have no real objections to this. What I don't understand is why we wouldn't see the full picture. That bit I don't get. I think the amendment that Councillor Jones has put forward is perfectly fair. Ask the government. We want to write to the MP as a council. We're going to write to the Secretary of State. Why wouldn't we write to the trustees as well and say, you know, what do you think? Let's have a full picture. I don't understand why we wouldn't do that. It's not that difficult to do. It's not that difficult an answer for them to give, and it gives us a full picture. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Obviously, there seems to be a few that disagree with the motion. So therefore, I've got to put the amendment. So therefore, I'm going to put the amendment to the vote.
Chairman, Councillor Muckley is indicating, and Councillor Jones would have a right of reply.
Well, no, it doesn't come up here that they want to speak.
Sorry, yes, I have just taken my hand down as soon as it was mentioned. Sorry, just because I left it up for ages last time. My apologies. Thank you, Chair. Bearing in mind what, listening to both sides of the argument and the extra explanation from Councillor Johnson, I was wondering whether the amendment would be better if we send them a copy of the letter that we sent to the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. That way they know what our intentions are. They understand what we where we stand, but you know, we're not teaching them how to suck eggs in a way. We're sort of just saying, you know, we are for justice for mine worker pensions. I don't know whether Councillor Jones would be interested in amending the amendment to that, and whether that way it would be more amenable to both sides. It's just a suggestion.
Councillor, I'm going to call. Before I go
Councillor,
back,
sorry, Chairman. Councillors Martin and Sutherland have indicated.
I know they do, yeah. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. It's not for me, it's for Councillor Bennett. He wants to speak on the amendment.
Councillor Bennett.
Hello, Chairman. Hello, everyone. In relation to this amendment, I was actively involved in this pension drama years ago, and I think one or two of you are getting the wrong end of the stick. The trustees, under the regulations appertaining to their duties, is that they are there to get the best return they can on the investments which they are dealing with. And on that basis, they deal with all the managers of particular funds throughout the country and abroad, for that matter. So their job is to get the best return. And we had the same problem with this in the South African apartheid movement, where the judge ruled that the trustees can only work on the basis of getting the best return, and that case was lost. Now, in relation to this, when the trustees put in their investment arrangements of what they can get on each return, that's their job finished. They don't have any say in how it's distributed. That's the matter for the trustees, the representatives of the respective bodies of the appropriate trade unions. And on that basis, it's not so long ago that there was a debate in this House of Commons, and I took a particular interest in this, where the Minister of the Department agreed that there was a problem regarding the distribution and the share out of the pension scheme because of some of the points which have said about, you know, the 50%, 10%, 40%. And the minister at that time agreed and got the backing of the House of Commons that she would take it away and discuss it with the appropriate people, and she would come back to the House of Commons with a reply. Now, my thoughts at that time was she came back and said that they had acted on the advice of the trustees regarding the investment, and there was going to be no change from the government's stance in relation to how it was going to be distributed. Now, it might be helpful to cut out what a lot of you have been saying, if you got a copy of that debate and the reply from the government minister in relation to the House of Commons, because the minister did say it would be brought back to the House of Commons. Now, at that particular point, I think that's when sometime I was involved at Oxford. But to put out all this, what you're saying now, why don't you just instruct to get the word-for-word item out of Hansard, and that will give you the answer what you want as where you are today. And then based on that, you can decide accordingly how I could play it in future. Because I'll tell you what they'll do. You can send that off, and they will say, based on the advice of the trustees, the investment portfolio is as follows, and at so-and-so meeting on so-and-so day, the distribution was allowed, and there's been no further change to that since. Now, my view is, if you want to pursue this further, get a copy of Hansard where this matter was dealt with. And there's not been an issue on this matter since. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, so I'm going to ask Councillor Brown, coming back to Councillor Brian Jones.
Sorry, Chairman, I think Councillor Sutherland has indicated, and we may have Councillor Pearson who wants to speak as well.
All right, I've got Councillor Brown Jones over the top of Councillor Sutherland.
Councillor, yeah. Sorry, Chairman, go ahead.
Is it me or Councillor Jones?
Sutherland.
Sutherland.
I'll check Councillor Sutherland, although he looks here, he's second in the queue.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, for me, what's been said, every pension fund has a trustee board, a board of trustees, and they do go for the best return. We're in a situation where there's an element of negotiation going on here. So why would we not choose to inform the board of trustees? I just think that we're just keeping them out of it, and that doesn't sound right. And there's no gain for keeping them out of it. That's the point I would like to register. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Brian Jones.
Councillor Pearson has indicated, Chairman.
Not on here. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm on the phone, Chair. That's why you can't see me. Yeah, I've listened to most of the debate. Unfortunately, I couldn't get in to put the proposition forward, the motion forward, but I have heard what people have been saying. And what Councillor Bennett has just said is absolutely perfectly right. Some of the trustees from the beginning haven't been there for the miners, shall we put it like that. Now we're starting to get a few trustees that are. But the motions itself, I can't understand why we should inform the trustees. They'll be told anyway. They'll be told at the next meeting, I expect, if the letters have gone forward. And they'll know what it's all about, because we've been fighting for years. But I'd like to, I know it's awkward, Chair, because we've gone past me now, but I'd like to speak before we get to the main vote after this, if you don't mind.
Yes, no problem. Councillor Jones.
Sorry, Chairman, Councillor Doug Smith has indicated now.
Yes, I know he has, but he's still bottom of the pile. Councillor Smith.
Councillor Jones is the last to speak before we go to the vote, Chairman.
Oh, then. Councillor Jones. Councillor Doug Smith, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, I have been a trustee of a national body, and all I'm saying here is it would be polite if we had anything of such a contentious nature involving the body of which I was a trustee. As a trustee, I would have been extremely miffed if people hadn't had the politeness to let us know. It makes no big difference, but I think it's the polite and right thing to do.
Right. Councillor Brian Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful for you trying to sneak me in early, but as it is an amended motion, that's why I'm last. Dealing with Councillor Muckley's point, with all due respect, I think that's just tinkering at the corners. So I wouldn't be in favour of that. In relation to Councillor Johnson's further explanation, and indeed Councillor Bennett's explanation, I think that's great what they've said, but at the end of the day, let's get the most current, up-to-date information from the people who were there now dealing with these matters. Why wouldn't we want to do that? Because if we're saying this is in the best interests of our retired miners' pensions and their widows, etc., why wouldn't we want to do it? I suspect this is just about the Labour Party opposing this just because it's an amendment. And if that's the reason, then that's really disappointing to hear, because it should be about the miners. And let's get the most up-to-date information, and not just writing to them, but their views. I mean, that was the purpose of my motion. Perhaps I didn't clarify it effectively, but I'd like to know what they feel about it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. At the end of the day, Councillor Jones, this is democracy, ain't it? You've got the opportunity to put an amendment, and this you put an amendment. Now, unfortunately, as chairman, I have no alternative but to take a vote on the amendment.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is purely to decide whether we also write to the trustees. And if I can ask one of the Democratic Services officers to call each member in alphabetical order. When you hear your name, please say whether you are for, against, or abstain from writing to the trustees also.
Ian, before we move on, I did believe that Councillor Muckley stated that we should send a copy.
That wasn't accepted by Councillor Jones, Chairman.
It wasn't accepted by him. Okay, thank you. And we'll take a vote on the amendment.
Okay, members, I hope you can hear me now. I've managed to get in. So it's for, against, or abstain. Councillor Adamson.
Chairman, I would have accepted Councillor Muckley's amendment, but against this one.
Yeah.
Councillor Orcott.
Councillor Orcott, you're on mute.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Against.
Councillor Bennett.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Booker.
For.
Councillor Buttery.
For.
Councillor Cartwright. Councillor Cartwright. Councillor Cartwright. You're on mute. I can see you. You're for, okay.
Oh.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm listening.
Councillor Crabtree.
For.
Councillor Davis.
Muriel, you're on mute.
Councillor Davis.
She's on mute again.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Dodson.
Against.
Councillor Dunnett.
For.
For. Thank you. Councillor Fisher, or is absent. Councillor Fitzgerald.
For.
Councillor Freeman.
For.
Councillor Hewitt.
For.
Councillor Hughes.
For.
Councillor Justin Johnson.
For, please.
Councillor Tony Johnson.
Against.
Councillor Brian Jones.
For.
Councillor Val Jones.
For.
Councillor Crajalis.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Layton.
For.
Councillor Lyons.
For.
Councillor Martin.
Against.
Councillor Mitchell.
Against.
Councillor Molyneux.
For.
Councillor Muckley.
For.
Councillor Newbury.
Against, Chair.
Councillor Pearson.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Priest.
Against.
Councillor Smith,
For.
Councillor Startin.
For, please, Steve.
Thank you. Councillor Stretton.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Sutherland.
For, please, Steve.
Councillor Sutton.
For, please.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
For, please.
Councillor Todd.
Against.
Councillor Wilkinson.
For.
Councillor Whitton.
Against.
And Councillor Woodhead.
For.
Have you got my vote now, Ian?
Yeah, what you said.
Against.
Who was that? Councillor
Councillor Cartwright, sorry. Ian.
Cartwright. Sorry, you were giving us a thumbs up. We took that as a
I was
4.
wondering if you could hear me or not. It's against, sorry.
I'm sorry. Okay, that was against. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 22, 4. So that's a majority of 4.
Right. As has been carried, the amendment that now becomes a substantive motion. Does anyone else wish to speak before we go to the vote?
I do, Chair.
Carry on, Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chair. I've heard the debate going through tonight, and I'd ask all members to vote for this, whatever your political party. And it's all right, Councillor Lyons saying it's political. Of course it's political. Don't you think we're fighting the Labour Party ourselves and we're Labour members? We've been fighting them while they was in for 3 terms. They're taking money off the miners, off the surplus. Would we take the money off the armed forces, the police, the fire service, the NHS? No. We're in uproar. We don't matter on any miners. We take it off them. Nobody's bothered. I'm asking you all to vote for this motion. Thank you.
Right. I will ask Ian, what motion are we now voting on?
So it's the original motion plus an addition to also write to the trustees. And I have councillors Martin, Lyons and Jones indicating to speak, Chairman.
Yes, Councillor Martin.
Chair, just through you, before we go any further, do I get an opportunity to sum up at the end?
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got to come in on some of the things that Councillor Lyons said. She summed up on what had happened with investments, etc. But I'm sure Councillor Johnson or Pearson will put me right on this. But didn't the National Coal Board have a 12-month holiday from making contributions, and they never took up paying any contributions after?
Yep, twice.
Was that in the 80s? Last time when Councillor Johnson put a similar motion a few years ago. When the Coalfields Community Campaign was launched by Tony Blair's government, a Labour government, I read that white paper from front to back and I thought, this is fantastic. This is the pear tree. Being a coal board, an estate built by the Coal Board for miners. I was chair of the Pear Tree Residents Association at the time, so we put in for a grant from this Coalfields Community Fund. We didn't match the criteria. That's how much Tony Blair's Labour government gave back to the miners. It was the miners' pension money that was in this fund, but a miner's estate didn't match the criteria to apply for a grant. So it's not political at all, Chairman. As Councillor Johnson said, he's been accused of using strong language, but it's been plundered by all governments.
Right, Councillor Lyons.
Chairman, sorry to clarify, Councillor Lyons has already spoke on the original motion, so she's only allowed a further right to speak if she wishes to move a further amendment.
Do you wish to move a further amendment, Councillor Lyons?
No, Chair.
Councillor Brian Jones hasn't spoken on the main issue yet, Chairman.
Councillor Brian Jones, you're there again, sir.
Yes, all I'd like to say, thank you for supporting the amendments. And I'm just a little bit confused. Councillor Martin says it's not political, if I understood it correctly. Councillor Johnson says it's not political. And then Councillor Pearson says it very much is political. Do the Labour Party know what their group view is on this matter? It's very confusing, I must say.
Could I ask, Councillor Jones, thanks for your input, but here as chairman, I'm trying to chair a meeting, and I'll be quite honest, you've had an amendment and the amendment is carried, right? I would now like to put the amendment, the original, I would now like to put the original motion plus the amendment to the council for a vote. Is anyone happy with that?
I would like a few more words as the proposer, if that's okay.
Chairman, Councillors Newbury and Starton are indicating to speak before Councillor Johnson.
Oh, right. Councillor Jones, can you... thank you very much. Councillor Newbury.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I won't take up too much time. I just wanted to say in response to Councillor Brian Jones's comments that I think as a Labour group, we are absolutely sure of what our position is. I think there's a slight difference there in terms of what the speakers were referring to when they used the word political. As I took it, and Councillor Pearson was referring to the fact that any decisions that are made, particularly where they're affecting people's lives in such an important way as this issue does, that is political. Anything to do with decision making is inevitably political. Us debating it tonight is political. That doesn't mean that it's party political. That doesn't mean it's partisan. And that's what other councillors were alluding to, the fact that, you know, this is an issue which has not been dealt with by successive governments of various political persuasions. And as a group, we're all united in that view as well. So that's all I wanted to say, Chair. I think it's a little bit insulting to suggest that we're not united in our view, because we absolutely are, and all councillors are on the same page with that.
Councillor Starting.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make it very clear that nobody on our side is opposed to this either, and certainly not Councillor Lyons, as Councillor Pearson alluded to. We just felt that writing to all bodies that are involved is important. So we fully support this. We fully support that miners get a fair share of what they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Whitten. Paul, you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now.
Yeah, in answer to Brian Jones, of course it's political. It's been political since 1980, since Thatcher tried to shut 72 pits. All miners were doing was fighting for the jobs, and this is a byproduct of that.
Right, thank you very much. I am now going to... Ian, would you write out the now substantive motion for the council to vote on?
Chairman, does Councillor Johnson wish to exercise his right of reply before we go to the vote?
Yes, I might, Chair. Thank you very much. Just referring to the remarks made by Councillor Brian Jones, it is quite easy to get confused with regard to capital P, party political, etc. It's also easy to get confused what age you can actually work underground in a coal mine according to the law, but we'll leave that one. As a matter of a few figures, according to the most recent MPS accounts for 2019-2020, there are just over 130,000 miners in receipt of payment of their pensions. There are 13,483 deferred pensions, that's people who haven't claimed from the scheme as yet. Those are the figures of last year. I can quite say hand on heart that that number will have sadly decreased somewhat, particularly regarding the people who are actually claiming their pensions due to the pandemic and to the well-known fact that coal miners and even their families suffer from greater ill health than normal members of our community. So it's a conservative estimate that the government have taken 4.2 billion some of the campaigners, which are at odds with the trustees, I might add, and that's the reason why I didn't see the point in writing to the trustees, claim that it is in excess of £10 billion which is taken place. While the average pensioner, Chair, gets £84 a week. £84 a week for, I don't know, something like 20 years in the mining industry, working underground, being exposed to danger, being exposed to disease, and all the things that you take with you when you come out of the pit. I might also add that 50 MPs of all parties, so we're non-political, not just the Labour Party, have written to the Select Committee for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, calling for a public inquiry looking into the present pension arrangements. Now, as I understand, and I remember Councillor Lyons saying this, what seemed like an age ago now, our local MP, as a cabinet member, I believe, is not able to sign early day motions. However, she can write to the Select Committee in support of the request for the public inquiry. So I would urge our MP to do that on behalf of the people that she represents and on behalf of former miners, their widows and their families. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Ian, can you read out once again the motion, including the substantive motion, and then I'll ask if anyone's against it.
Chairman, the motion to be considered now is as set out in the agenda, with the minor grammatical corrections suggested by Councillor Muckley, with also an amendment to, in addition to writing to the Secretary of State, we write to the trustees also.
Is everybody aware of what you've just heard? Is anyone against that? No, then that motion is carried.
Thank you, Chair.
On now, motion 2, I call upon the Leader of the Council, Councillor George Adamson, to present his motion to Council. Councillor Adamson.
Thank you, Chairman. My motion is quite a long motion, 2.5 pages. So with your permission, Chairman, I won't read it all. Just parts of it and then go into a short speech on it. COVID-19 has deepened existing inequalities, hitting the poorest and most vulnerable communities the hardest. That's a fact. It's put a spotlight on the economic inequalities and our fragile social safety nets that leave vulnerable communities to bear the brunt of the crisis. But at the same time, social, political and economic inequalities have amplified the impacts of the pandemic. On the economic front, COVID-19 pandemic has significantly increased global unemployment and dramatically slashed workers' incomes. And that's it from the United Nations, Chairman. The poverty emergency, which I'd like the Council to declare, and the climate emergency run together. There's a crossover between the two. As I said, the pandemic has hit the poorest in our community the hardest. And if we want to be relevant to people, we need to talk about things that are relevant to them. And people, over half of the people who seek help from food banks are actually in employment. A lot of people think it's just people unemployed or pensioners who go to food banks. It's not. People who are actually working go to food bank, and well over half nationally, that's the case. And people in poverty should be at the centre, along with climate change, of all our policies. And both should be considered when we bring in our policies. I think we all support the climate change motion, which I brought in 2019. I would hope that everyone will support this policy as well. We used to think the only way out of poverty was to get a job. As I said, it's not the case. As I said, a lot of people who are actually working have to rely on food banks to survive. And that's not a criticism of any government. This is non-political. It's just a fact. Poverty also affects educational achievement. Those of us who are school governors and or parents will know that many students on free school meals struggle to get similar educational standards as their peers because of the pressures and issues of living in poverty. And this promotes a vicious circle. A lower educational achievement leads to poorer paid jobs or unemployment, and here we go all over again into the next generation. We need to think afresh and put people and poverty at the centre stage along with our climate emergency. We need to commit to fully understand how poverty affects residents and work with our partners, because it's not just a job for Cannock Chase Council, it's work for our partners, the NHS, the County Council and so forth, including those in the education field to help us to understand better. And we need, most importantly, to involve those who are in poverty, to understand how they feel and what their needs and views are. We can perhaps empathise and we can think how they might feel, but they're the only ones who can tell us how they actually feel and what pressures they have to live with. But they're the very people who probably won't respond to traditional methods of consultation. If you go online, do an online consultation, will people who are from deprived backgrounds really get involved to the extent we want them to? They're probably too busy trying to make ends meet, find out how to feed the kids, pay the rent, pay the mortgage, or whatever, to spend time responding. So we need to reach out to them in different ways. I think it's vital that we ensure that those most heavily impacted are supported, not just in the short term. Let's say food bank's great, giving a food parcel out, that's vital, helps you through a week, that's great, but it doesn't help you the rest of your life. We need to try to ensure that they are empowered. We need to shift the balance of poverty locally so people are better off. And we can't do so alone, as I say, we've got to share information with our partners. Examples I gave in there is Cheshire and Cheshire West have got their Poverty and Truth Commission. I've spoken to the cabinet member there. They're more than happy to share information with us. And obviously we could do the same with them and other councils who go along the same boat. There's no need perhaps always to do the same research. If the information is there from somebody else, we can use what they've got. And as we all know, Cannock Chase is one of the most deprived areas in Staffordshire. It still is, and that's the case. We owe it to those most in need to get them out of poverty, stop this vicious circle, to get them the support they need so they can get out of the circle of poverty. We want them to get into work, not just get a job, set up their own businesses, raise them out of poverty and increase their life opportunities. It's vital that we get out of this awful vicious circle. Chairman, we're in a pandemic and an economic crisis, but there's never a good time to do something like this. There's always going to be a reason why we can't do it. But let's take advantage. We want to take advantage of the fact that the economy doesn't have to be the same as it was 12 months ago. Let's make it better. Let's make it work better. But we shouldn't stop from trying to make things better. So we owe it to those most in need at this dreadful time to help them and help them as much as we can. So, Chairman, as I say, I can hand on heart say this is not political, and I do hope that everyone in this chamber will support my motion. We want to help the poorest in our district and to help them have better lives and better lives in future. So I so move, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Adamson. Is there a seconder for this motion?
Yes, please, Chair. I'd like to second that. Councillor Newbury.
Thank you, Councillor Newbury. Are there any comments on the motion? Councillor Newbury, you seem to have got your hand in first there.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'd just like to make a few brief remarks, if that's okay, and then you can move on to others.
Yeah.
Obviously, poverty is shamefully ever present in our society, and I think we all have seen the many ways that it's been exposed and exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. It touches every part of a person's life, and I believe that it affects every part of our society as well. When a person's financial security is in jeopardy, we're all affected through the impact that has on the economy. When a person isn't able to make the most of a good education or access to good education, we're all affected by the reduction of their potential. When a person isn't able to access the health services they need, we can all be affected in many ways, and that's something that I think we're all too aware of at the moment. When a person feels left behind or disregarded by society, that can damage our society enormously. As a cabinet member, members will have heard me say on many occasions that I feel climate change is an issue which cuts across all of our services and work streams at the council and shouldn't be viewed in isolation. And I feel the exact same way about tackling poverty, because many of our services relate directly to this issue. When it comes to people being able to access our leisure services or not, that can have an impact on their health and their well-being. When it comes to tackling environmental health issues, they so often affect the poorest residents more than anyone else. And when it comes to people being able to access secure and affordable housing and tackling homelessness, that's so vital to people living a dignified life. And when it comes to encouraging job creation and economic development in our district, we can provide opportunities that can actually change people's fortunes. Obviously, we can't end poverty as a council, but we can go a long way to improving the lives of our residents. and as the motion says, also work proactively with many other government bodies, education providers, trade unions and charitable groups to tackle this jointly. I think this should be viewed as an emergency, as a priority for our council, and as something that we consider in everything we do. So I commend this motion to the council, and I hope that it will be supported by all of us.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nobley. Councillor Muckley.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will be voting in favour of this motion, but I do wish to comment quickly. In the summer of 2019, we declared a climate emergency. Since then, we have done very, very little to ensure that we are meeting our 2030 deadline. Councillor Adamson quite rightly said that this poverty emergency should be centre stage along with climate emergency. Councillor Newbury quite rightly said climate change should not be viewed in isolation. It should permeate everything that we do. However, as a councillor, I have been very disappointed in the amount of work we've actually done to combat climate change and to assist with the climate emergency. I was on a planning meeting last week, and eyes were rolled and groans were made when I mentioned the climate change emergency and mentioned climate issues. And I don't think that that should be the way that the council is when we have all agreed that there is a climate emergency. And my concern here is that the same will happen to a poverty emergency. We'll pass it because, you know, nobody likes poverty, and it affects so many people within our district. It's a very, very worthwhile motion to pass. However, I am very concerned that this will be simply lip service, just as the climate change emergency has been, and that nothing will be done. It's been nearly 2 years, and at the planning meeting last week, I was told, well, we can't insist on you know, big organisations like Aldi, even though it's in their policy, having solar panels because we don't have a policy about it. I said, no, but we've got a motion, a climate emergency motion, and that should inform all of our decisions, but it doesn't. And my concern here is that the poverty emergency will go the same way. So I very much hope that it won't, and I very much hope to be working with both sides of the chamber to push this forwards. But I am very concerned as to how much will be achieved by this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lyons.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Leader of the Council for bringing forward this motion. I have done some research in it, and I've noted the original motion from Councillor Clare of Cheshire West, as Councillor Adamson mentioned, and I know that that was established as a result of the work done by West Cheshire Poverty Truth, as was mentioned. And Councillor Adamson at the very beginning of this meeting, talked about different authorities working together and the strength that that had. When Councillor Clare in Cheshire actually moved this motion, she talked about having a collective, stronger voice, and she encouraged other councils across the country to join with using this template and to moving this motion forward. And I agree with that. I think all of us are aware today that the global pandemic and the recession have devastating consequences. And many of us, I know many of the councillors here today have been out volunteering in the community and are extremely familiar with the devastation that's been left behind as a result of the pandemic. My fear is that the proposals are too broad. Adopting a sort of one-shoe-fits-all approach could, as Councillor Muckley rightly say, result in the council simply playing lip service rather than having action points from the go. When I was looking into this, I looked at Staffordshire Observatory, which many of you know has got all the statistics and various different statistical data on, and a few things struck me. Mainly, Cannock Chase, so going back to 2018, which is when the latest data was available, so pre-pandemic, 14% of local residents were classified as being in the most deprived nationally, and child poverty locally here in Cannock Chase was 16.4%. Now, I think everyone on this council would agree that is completely unacceptable. As a council, we must do all that we can to address that. It impacts every area of our local community. But if you look at the statistics within the observatory, within the data available, it highlights that actually the people living within the most deprived areas of Cannock Chase, their life expectancy is between 6 and 8 years less than those living in other areas. Now that's just within a district. So that really highlights the inequalities that Councillor Adamson has referred to. And as Councillor Newblue rightly mentioned, we can assume that they've only been exacerbated by the pandemic. Looking further into those statistics, two things stand out. Two things really struck me. The first was the percentage or the proportion of older people within Cannock Chase that were living with deprived households, and the fact that actually, and shockingly, that was significantly worse than the national average. So looking at that, obviously that was pre-pandemic, looking at that through a post-pandemic or mid-pandemic lens, we can only assume that actually the older generations are the people that have been deemed to be vulnerable and therefore advised to isolate even more. So you can only imagine the effect that that has had. The second thing that struck me, and it has been mentioned already tonight, and I know Councillor Adamson rightly mentioned it, was education. So locally and statistically, Cannock Chase GCSE attainment is significantly worse than the national average. And that then follows through to people with qualifications, and sort of, it has a knock-on effect. And again, looking at that through a pandemic point of view, although we have no way of knowing of the impact that the pandemic has had on education, I think we're all aware of how hard homeschooling is. So the difficulties as a result of that. I think it's right to say that the government have provided unprecedented support during the pandemic, and that should be acknowledged. So things like the furlough scheme, like the business grants, the restrictions on landlords, and things like devices for education. And I think that should be acknowledged, but this councillor could do more. So Councillor Adamson captures this exactly rightly within his motion, that this is our moment so we could locally repave sort of the way we move forward, the way we tackle poverty. So in all, I like Councillor Adamson's motion, but I'd like to go a little bit further to make sure, as Councillor Muckley said, we're not just simply paying lip service. So looking at the motion itself, one of the aspects, it looks to identify, report and address unfair barriers. Yes, we should absolutely do that. But in the meantime, why can't we and why don't we take immediate action to tackle the problems that are already identified within the local data that's available? So the existing evidence, as I've just outlined, shows us what the big contributory factors to poverty within Cannock Chase are. So Councillor Adamson talks about empowering the local community, and I think actually the local councillor is an enabler to do this. And we can do that through things that are within this council's control. So Councillor Newbury rightly talked about environmental health and all sorts of different things within the council's control. With a few examples, the planning committee plays a huge role in economic development. And we all know that well-planned development leads to good quality, stable employment. That helps reduce the levels of poverty. The motion itself mentions wages. This council can influence business. It can look at whether they want to fill employment space with units that are likely to offer more unskilled, lower paid jobs, or whether they want to work to attract skilled, well-paid industries into the district to benefit local residents. Councillor Newbury mentioned environmental health. Absolutely right. Environmental health looks at housing, it looks at housing conditions, food safety, compliance with occupational health. They can all make a huge difference, and that is within this council's responsibility to poverty. Other influences: housing, access to green space, leisure facilities, things that have been looked at in the past, like unhealthy food outlets in their vicinity, and the proportion of them locally. The list goes on. But our starting point could be to tackle poverty in the older generations, as has been identified within the statistical data, by assessing local isolation and the support network within local areas. So for example, and I'm going to use an example here, and I know people are rolling their eyes, but I will just finish. For an example, Cotswold District Council, their community engagement team actually worked with their police and crime commissioner to create an index map to highlight the levels of poverty within older generations. And from that, it was the district council that were able to develop initiatives in order to counter those problems. So that was a solution within the district council's reach. And we've identified that problem already. Why should we approve, why should we put through this motion that's quite vague without being specific on where we're starting? I've mentioned improving the environments that children grow up in. So another option would be the council consider holding regular information sessions. So bringing for families, so bringing the council's housing officers, environmental health officers, community support workers, local housing associations, bringing them all together. And Councillor Adamson himself identified the importance of engaging with them and actually identifying their views. Well, we can do that within the council's own teams, and then that helps to identify and then go on to assist those vulnerable households. We've talked about, and I know both Councillor Adamson and Councillor Muckley talked about how important it is that this is dealt with alongside the climate change emergency. And I completely, 100% agree with the comments that Councillor Muckley raised with regards to that. So again, another example, and I'm going to do it, the Huntingshire District Council, they run free fuel poverty, and this is a district council, they run free fuel poverty advice sessions, which help residents to increase their energy efficiency. Now, that is assisting our residents. It will help to lessen and alleviate the impact of poverty, whilst also helping them to be more environmentally friendly. So from my point of view, I think that fits perfectly with point 6 of Councillor Adamson's motion, as it offers not only is it a community-led hub, it's the council offering first-hand advice. In September, we amended a similar motion in relation to homelessness to ask for a stakeholder event. It could be looked at whether these two could be brought together. I'm going to make one final point, which is regards to housing. So housing affects people of all ages. And I think looking at various different examples and looking at best examples from elsewhere, Tamworth Borough Council have worked very closely with house colleagues. And again, we're talking about a district council to create a healthy housing policy, which sets out interventions to reduce inequalities in the most deprived areas of Tamworth. So why can't we ask our own councillors to undertake this work and ask the relevant scrutiny committee to revisit our own housing policy, see how that, analyse whether that can be improved, and if it can, looking at it from a wider lens. So within that other policy, they look at everything from home installation, debt advice, how to health proof and damp proof a property. Why can't we revisit ours through a wider lens and see how we can better help our residents in that respect? So in all, I do absolutely support the motion, but I propose to localise it, to speed up the action. Councillor Adamson mentioned we need to
Councillor Lyons, I'm sorry, you've passed 10 minutes speaking.
Okay, can I move the amendment?
No.
You've got no amendments. You've already said you're going to support the motion. Councillor Woodhead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Lyons, for a lot of information and research you've done there. It might be helpful to share that with us outside of this, because clearly you've done a lot of work to look at this. Again, it's a motion that I'm very much supportive of. Just a couple of questions that maybe Councillor Adamson would be able to address when he's summing up around this. So we know we've spent, and officers have spent a tremendous amount of time on our corporate plan that's been worked on, and hopefully will come to council soon for review and adoption. If this is something that is going to be as cross-cutting and in-depth as the climate emergency, as we know that we passed that 18 months ago, now 18, 19 months ago, and that's been folded into this. Is that passing this going to impact on the timescale of having that that corporate plan published? If it is, what would be that timescale? And if it's not, since this is something that we want, if it passes, to be central to everything that we're doing in the same way as a climate emergency, will there be a time frame for a further review of the climate of the corporate plan to incorporate the outcomes from passing this motion? Also, that we have a particular procedure around motions that will cost the council money, and where it would be taken away and cabinet report come back as part of a debate here, assuming it's not been identified as that by officers, that there's no direct cost associated with this, which seems difficult with the 13 amendments. So again, it's more questions for just to clarify, but supportive of what we're trying to achieve here, and trust that all members will support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Woodard. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. It's Councillor Bennett that wants to speak, not me.
Oh.
Hello, Chairman. Thank you very much. As I'm actively involved with illness and have been now for, 12 and a half months with illness and self-isolating and everything associated with that, even today and every day, I'm on 20 milligrams of morphine. So you know what type of problems I have. But if you don't pass this motion, which the leader has put in, you're not going to get anything done whatsoever. And Councillor Wood just touched on it, because when you start looking at what Councillor Lyons indicated, it's money and it's staffing and it's a host more things. And you've got some issues which you've not mentioned, because at the moment in Staffordshire, that they have taken away all surgeons from orthopedic work, that's hips, shoulders, ribs, cancer, and they've taken them all away from that to concentrate on coronavirus. And basically, that's also because nurses and the frontline staff are dropping ill like flies. Now, I'm in contact with people nearly every week on this particular issue, because they know how long I have been indisposed. And I tell you this, that you can put forward as many issues as you like. We've all got opinions. You know, it's like noses. We've all got one. But we've got to do something which is practical, and it's not going to take money, and it's not going to take staff. So my view is, make a start with accepting this motion as submitted by the leader. It's a start, and it's a good start, but you're going to have to hit more than ever when surgeons get back to doing operations of kidneys, cancer, hips. They're going to be hit, because last time I heard, there was nearly 300 people waiting more than 12 months for surgery, and they can't have them because there's no surgeons to do it. And that information, I get it every week, because I read up and I try to keep account of what's happening. So accept this motion, don't turn it down, don't put any amendments to it, because if you take it away to give it further consideration, it will be put in the long grass. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Booker.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to second Councillor Lyons' amendment. So what I should do is, if everyone's happy, is I shall pull it forwards myself. I won't bother explaining it again. We've already done that. I'll just read it out and then we can move straight on with it. So the amendment that we'd put forwards was 4 additional points to be added. 1, to undertake a local review to assess the extent of isolation and the strength of the support networks in the district amongst those aged 65 plus. 2, hold regular, well signposted advice and information events for families, which bring together housing officers, environmental health officers, community support workers, and local housing associations to help identify and assist vulnerable households. 3, our housing policy with a view to evaluating and, where possible, improving our role in helping to tackle wider issues and ensure homes within the district are as healthy and efficient as possible. And the 4th one, working with young students myself, it's to work closely with schools in the area to support them in providing the highest level of education, recognising that education is one of the quickest ways out of poverty and the surest way to end equality. I apologise, that was a tad wordy.
Right. Well, now the hands are going up like anybody's business.
Chairman, there's been an amendment proposed.
Yes,
You could ask whether Councillors Adamson and Newbury are happy to adopt those, or otherwise we'd need a seconder to the amendment.
Are you willing to adopt those, Councillor Adamson, Councillor Newbury?
Chairman, I had to write them down very quickly. Councillor Booker did sort of race through them very, very quickly.
I apologise, Councillor Adamson.
But basically what he's moved there is already in my motion. It just quantifies them a little bit more. It's already there, and yeah, so I'm more than happy to accept those. But I still reserve my right to speak at the end of the debate.
Right, so then, Councillor Doug Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief observation, going to what's been said earlier. We already have health in all policies. I think the two should work very well together.
Thank you very much, Doug. Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you, Chair. I was getting ready to second the motion, which I don't believe I now need to, but I'm fully supportive of this. I think what he does, he makes it very local. I thought Councillor Adamson's motion was excellent. It deals with poverty. I think it's absolutely fantastic, but we need to make things locally, and that's exactly what the amendment does. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hewitt. Councillor Johnson, Tony.
Thank you, Chair. I think we've learned a lesson there that brevity is the enabler of democracy. I might make the point that some of our more elderly residents might have been, I do laugh there, Councillor Starty. I might add that some of our more elderly residents might not have been in poverty had they been in receipt of a decent pension from the Mine Workers Pension Scheme. Yeah, I would further add that the responsible authority for education is the County Council, and that the legal authority as regards health, once again, is the County Council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right. Ian, have you got those amendments down?
I haven't written them down.
Sorry, just to put in, either myself or Councillor Lyons can email them over, because I appreciate they are quite wordy.
Yeah. Well, I'll say to the council, Councillor Booker is going to email them to Ian. You've all accepted, Councillor Adamson and Councillor Newbury's accepted the amendments. So now I'm going to say to the council.
So Councillor Adamson will have a right of reply before we go to a vote.
Sorry, Councillor Adamson, the right to reply. Carry on, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just briefly, we've had a good debate today on Councillor Muckley. Climate emergency, which we passed in 2019, is vitally important. And if eyes were rolled and people groaned at the last planning committee, I can only apologise. I would hope it wasn't any of my members. If it was, I apologise on behalf of the Labour group. It should not happen. Climate emergency is vitally important. It's a major part of our policy, and it affects every single policy we make. Equally, if this motion is passed today, and it sounds like it will be, that will also become vitally important and a major part of every policy we make and every decision we make. Officers will not pay lip service to either policy, I can assure you. As has been said, 14% of our residents in severe deprivation. We are the worst, the poorest district in the whole of Staffordshire. Education is hard. Teachers it's difficult at the moment. Education standards are lower here in Cannock Chase. Remote learning is not helping. Teachers are working extremely hard to do their best. Obviously, being home taught is not as good as actually being in school for lots of reasons, including obviously socialisation as well as achieving educational standards. So sooner we can get this wretched pandemic under control and the kids back in school, the better. it's always been our policy to encourage high-skilled jobs, high-skilled employers into the district, and we'll continue to do so. And I should say, I forgot to mention, Councillor Muckley, to say that we're only paying lip service to climate emergency. Can you remind you about the Alfgar site in Rugeley, where we're building council houses to the Pass House standards, which so they are extremely environmentally friendly, and so it just shows we are taking it seriously, and it is in our policy. Councillor Lyons spoke at length. She encapsulated basically what's in my motion anyway, so which is why I'm more than happy to accept the amendments, because it goes along with exactly what we said. We want to address the very issues that I think everybody has spoken about. Nobody wants poverty, nobody wants deprivation or lower educational standards. And yes, it will affect our corporate plan. Obviously, I'll speak to Judith Orbert to ensure that the corporate plan is reviewed to take into account this motion, if, as I hope, it is carried tonight. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Adamson. Right, members of the council. The amendment has been accepted. So now we have a substantive motion. Now the details of the amendments are going to get emailed to the solicitor. So now I'm going to ask, is anyone against the substantive motion? No, then that's carried. Thank you very much. Motion 3, I call upon
excuse me interrupting, Chair. Could we have a sort of 5-minute recess, please? Would you mind?
All right, you can have a 5-minute comfort break if you want one.
Well, I would like one. I'm not sure anybody else, but yeah.
Okay.
And Chair, could I also make another point, just why I've got you for 2 minutes? It's just to the solicitor. It would have been great to give Councillor Lyons a 1-minute warning on that. I accept 10 minutes is a long time to talk, but if she'd have gone in at 9 minutes, she would have been able to finish off quite neatly, and then we wouldn't have had the problem of moving the amendments around. Just a word to the solicitor, 1-minute warning.
Well, I'd just like to say it's the council that make the rules, Councillor Hewitt.
I'm aware of that, but I think a 1-minute warning is not that difficult a thing to do.
Yeah, I can, if I could answer that. It was me who interrupted. It was one of those where I honestly didn't know where Councillor Lyons was going to wrap it up, and it just seemed to go on and on and on. And it got to the 10 minutes, I'm afraid. I appreciate what you're saying. Had I realised it would have gone on that long, then I perhaps could have given a minute's warning.
Thank you, Ian. All worth listening to. So.
Steve, actually.
We do it in planning, so it's not that difficult.
Yeah. And thank you, Chair, for the 5-minute recess.
Oh, I don't want to be the left down there. I'll never get a drink of water. I'll put it about 20 minutes. Where?
Okay. Just in case anybody wasn't aware.
Anybody can have a jolly pipe, Steve, if they were here, they're just not here.
I think they guessed my age, Steve.
I've been on a chase.
A friend of mine,
Can
moved
everyone
in-
remember this is still being streamed? You're live.
Yes, we know.
Oh. We're not saying anything out of order, are we, George?
I'm just reminding you, just come back.
I didn't think
Oh,
so.
yeah. Just saying, Maureen, a friend of mine, if you went for her injection at Bramwell Way, and she was in a wheelchair, but they was ever so good. They said, stay in the car, and the doctor went out to her and gave her a needle in the car, which is good, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's good. I hear it's well organised.
They said she was
Look
well
forward
looked
to my visit on Friday.
I took a resident down to the Roman Way Saturday night, and I found it very dark down there.
Yeah.
In the back.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, Alan, to be honest. It is a bit nice.
Oh, yeah, all right, almost. I'm going for curry after. Is everyone back now? Councillor Sutherland? You're back. I believe everyone's back now. Well, I am on my screen. So I'll continue. Motion 3, I call upon the Health and Wellbeing Portfolio Leader, Councillor Martin, to present her motion to Council. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. This does follow on from the previous motion put by the Leader of the Council, Chair. We're in the height of a pandemic, and the high unemployment and spiralling poverty forecast for 2021 isn't inevitable. Urgent action can still avert some of this. I would like to therefore urge this council to call on the government to take the measures that can protect people's jobs and incomes, lives and livelihoods. These must include an increase in SSP to £320 a week, which is the living wage, and make it available to all workers so people can afford to self-isolate. The current £96 a week is a fifth of average weekly earnings, and 2 million who earn less than £120 a week are not even entitled to that. Even while the vaccine is being rolled out, people will still need to self-isolate to prevent the virus spreading. This is showing more now, Chair, with the number of people who are being tested. People are being tested, showing no symptoms and getting positive results, and they are told to self-isolate. If all you can expect to get for 2 weeks while you're self-isolating is £96 a week, or not even that, if you don't earn enough to qualify for it anyway, it's asking people to spread the virus even more, Chair. It's also a fix to furlough so that no one is paid less than minimum wage. It's unacceptable that there are hundreds of thousands of the lowest paid receiving only 80% of the minimum living wage. It's set at the minimum living wage because it's the minimum amount that people are supposed to be able to live on, but they're only paying 80% of the minimum living wage. And also no cut in universal credit in April, taking back the £20 a week. This averages out at £1,000 a year from millions of low-income households. I know it was debated in Parliament the other day, and I know that the majority of Tory MPs did abstain. But I think they did that because we'll find out what they want to do about this when it comes to the budget. But we've got to get this to them to let them know our concerns before then. An increase to public service wages and raising the minimum wage to £10 an hour. After a decade of austerity, it's a grave insult to millions of public service workers who cared for our loved ones during the crisis. Raising their wages and the minimum wage of £10 per hour will greatly assist in the fight against in-work poverty. One of the major supermarkets has taken a lead on this, Chair. I believe it's Morrison's. They've scrapped their bonus scheme to employees, but they've raised the wage to a minimum of £10 per hour for every employee. And I think this is a good lead to set. We also need to protect and create jobs. There's the TUC, this is a TUC motion, by the way, Chair. The TUC has shown that investing £85 billion in green infrastructures will create 1.2 million jobs in 2 years. And investing the resources public services need will create 600,000 jobs. This investment, alongside the packages of support which public sectors and businesses need can prevent more job losses. I therefore call on this council to resolve that the Managing Director pass on our demands to the government, and also to ask our MP for her support in this, as it does have a direct impact on many of her constituents. Thank you.
very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Martin. Is there a seconder for this motion?
Yes, that's me, Chair. And I'd like to say a few words while I'm here.
Carry on,
Please.
Councillor Whitten.
Yes, I'm delighted to second this motion, Chairman. For over a decade, we have witnessed the erosion of benefits, workers' rights and low pay to people that make up the backbone of this country. The latest pay freeze to frontline services and the threat to cut universal credit, while the super rich have been given huge tax breaks, can only be described as immoral. The Office of National Statistics reported that 10% of the poorest households have 3 times greater debts than their assets, compared with the richest 10% who have amassed a wealth 35 times greater than their total debts. And I call on all councillors to support this motion. After all, Boris did promise at the election that he would put an end to austerity and the wealth gap between North and South. Or was it just another piece of electoral cosmetics? Let's put it to the test and see if it's just false promises and spin. Thank you for that, Chair.
Well, thank you for seconding that. So are there any comments? Councillor Muckley.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a clarification point, really. At paragraph 3 of the motion, it talks about a fixed furlough so that no one is paid less than minimum wage. It is unacceptable. There are hundreds of thousands of the lowest paid receiving only 80% of the minimum living wage. But there are hundreds of thousands of people receiving 80% of the national minimum wage, not the living wage. So I was just a little bit confused as to the wording, because it uses minimum wage and living wage in the same paragraph. So in the roundup, I'd be very grateful if the proposer could explain that a little bit further, please.
Councillor Martin.
Shall I explain it now, or if there's anyone wants to speak, I'll speak last, Chair.
Well, I've got Councillor Woodhead. Oh, sorry, I've got Councillor Lyons. I'll come back to Councillor Muckley. Is it okay if she comes back last?
That's absolutely fine. I just wanted to clarify, should that really say 80% of the minimum living wage, or should it just say of the minimum wage? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lyons.
Chair, I do think Councillor, I don't know if it's technology playing up, but I think Councillor Woodhead did pop his hand up before me.
Well, I've got 2 hands up for now. Who wants to go first, yourself or Councillor Woodhead?
I'm happy for you to proceed, Councillor Lyons. It's fine.
Thank you, Councillor Woodhead. Thank you, Chair. Okay, firstly, I thank Councillor Martin for bringing forward the motion, but I don't feel that it follows on from the last motion that we considered. This is a TUC motion, and we very much in the last motion, with the amendment included, we talked about local, sort of on a local basis. This is very much a trade union motion as it is, that's not been localised. I think the motion itself demands that the government protect jobs, income and livelihoods, which I think we can all agree that the government has offered quite wide-ranging support. I'm not saying by any means that it was perfect, but it's easy to criticise. But at the end of the day, it's a global pandemic, there's no guidebook. 3 things that it mentioned within there: sick pay. Changes were made initially to make sure sick pay was payable from day one. It included self-isolation and it included shielding. What this motion has failed to mention is the fact that the universal credit was changed so that it could be applied for alongside sick pay, and also the fact there's a £500 track and trace support payment available to those that need it. I think failing to admit the whole all the support that's available could potentially mislead people. With regards to furlough, many of you know outside the council I work full time. I'm actually furloughed 1 day a week. I am incredibly grateful for that government support, because without that, We've heard that 12 million people could have lost their jobs. The crisis isn't over, and I'm glad that that scheme's been extended. I appreciate the concerns with regards to flexible furlough. I know that minimum wage is payable for all, must be payable for hours worked, and the 80% is so that it's equal to everybody else. Again, I'm not saying it's perfect, but I appreciate that support. With regards to the demands for no cost-cutting universal credit in April, I think this language incites and misleads. I know Councillor Johnson didn't like the word unprofessional earlier, so I'm going to use it best. It's disingenuous.
I didn't like lie, Chair. Lie was the word I accepted to.
Okay. I think the reality is universal credit was increased and working tax credit was increased by £1,000 in light of the pandemic to help those that need it most. At the time, no one has a crystal ball. No one knows what's going to happen in the future. Indeed, now we don't know where we're going to be in April. To begin with, April was set as a review point. The reality is that decision hasn't been made. This motion, Councillor Martin did mention the budget, but reading this motion alone, it seems to insinuate that motion, that decision has been made. It hasn't. And the reason Councillor Martin mentioned that Conservative MPs abstained, it's being considered as part of the preparation for the budget. And the simple reason is the vote was ambiguous and it's being considered anyway without that. With regards to the paragraph on public sector workers, I agree with this. This shouldn't be, and we've talked about it earlier today, it shouldn't be political point scoring. We're in the middle of a pandemic. The gap between private sector and public sector wages needs addressing. And I agree, and I thank that we will be indebted to the people that carried us through this pandemic, including those that are vaccinating right now. So I support that aspect of it. With regards to green jobs, I think we've all highlighted the importance of that at some point this evening. So just to conclude, I'm not going to vote against it because, as I've just highlighted, I don't disagree with all of the content. What I do disagree with is half-truths and misleading the public in order to score points. I do feel it's unprofessional, and I quote the motion itself, it demands. Now, this is our council reputation. Is this the public image that we want, that councillors demand to get their own way? Or do we want to be seen to work together collectively to fight for the needs to what's best for our residents? So, as has been mentioned, we're all aware there's a budget on the 3rd, and that's when these issues are being considered. The reality is no one foresaw the pandemic. There's so many unknowns, no one's got a crystal ball, and people like me have kept their jobs due to the furlough scheme, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. So some people haven't been so lucky, and I've worked throughout the whole pandemic as part of a local support group, and I appreciate that the awful situations and the difficulties and the challenges that people face, and our job is to be behind them and to support them and to be there when they need us. This isn't a time to play party politics. It's a national emergency. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Woodhead.
Thank you, Chair. It was again, I guess, a little bit on the drafting of the motion that I'm not comfortable with placing demands. I think we represent the views from the council rather than place demands, as Councillor Lyons was just talking about. I know Councillor Martin will pick up this question on minimum wage and the furlough around that. The other bit of clarification for myself was around the statutory sick pay. Is one of the things that we were including in the letter, an increase of statutory sick pay to the £320 a week from its current level. Is that something that we are asking to be a long-term increase in the welfare state, or is this part, and the whole measure, I guess, part of protecting the economic well-being and the subsequent social well-being of the community for the extended period of this this pandemic as we move through 2021. I think we all know it's not going to switch off and all lives are going to switch back on again. It is going to go on for some time. So are all these measures aimed at that sort of extended support period that the government has been putting a lot of support in, and I think credit where it's due for a lot of that. I think there are some, as Councillor Lyons said, it's not perfect, and there's certainly a group of the that go by themselves around the excluded that feel particularly aggrieved, and the arts community in particular has been affected, as we all know. But the support through furlough, through grants to businesses, certainly as a small business owner, it's kept employment within my business, and the grants have helped as well for the reduced income to cover some of the basic costs. So it has been helpful. But it was just trying to understand that, Councillor Martin, in terms of the period you're expecting these to be in place, or if they are things like increasing sick pay, statutory sick pay to a significant amount like that, which I'm fully for, but how will it be paid if it's an ongoing thing for forever? Because it's a big amount of money. Thank you.
I'd just like to add that Councillor Lyons did say during this pandemic there are no rules. Councillor Newbury.
There's no guidebook, not rules.
Councillor Newbury.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to start by saying that I think there definitely is some confusion around living wage terminology, and I'm sure Councillor Martin will pick that up, but I think that's been born out of a marketing trick that was put in place by George Osborne. He was Chancellor of the Exchequer. He essentially changed the name of the national minimum wage to the national living wage, and that's really undermined the meaning of the real living wage as defined by the Living Wage Foundation, and so hence, you know, confusions like this come up. I think I wanted to say firstly that this motion is not about political point scoring. It's a national motion that's been put forward by the TUC, yes, but it very much applies locally, and I think it's very much our job as councillors to be discussing this on behalf of our residents. I think we all want to see our country succeed following the pandemic, and putting forward alternatives, challenging decisions, or in the case of the universal credit uplift, challenging a lack of decision, is not point scoring. It's the job of those who are not in government to challenge things, put forward ideas. You know, as an administration, we've accepted ideas that have come from the opposition. A meeting or two ago, the leader of the opposition put forward a very sensible suggestion on tree planting. We didn't sneer at that and say, oh, that's political point scoring or criticising us by daring to put forward a different idea. No, we said, actually, that's a good idea, and we accept it and we take it forward. And I think it always seems that particularly when motions from trade unions come forward, there always seems to be a problem with that, and there always seems to be criticism, either direct or implicit, of that. And I think that's very unfair, especially given that in the last motion we just agreed that we would work with trade unions, amongst others, to benefit our residents. Now, on this, the kind of topic of motion, we know, we've heard anecdotally in the media that some people have felt they're not able to self-isolate. They can't afford to do that. And yes, the government have put in some, you know, extraordinary measures to support the country through this pandemic, but just turn it on its head and think about it from somebody that's on a low wage. Losing 20% of your income is a huge hit for many people, and many people are really struggling to cope with that, on top of all the other kind of wider effects that we're seeing in the economy. And it's true that this week the government could have backed the motion on the uplift in universal credit. They chose not to. Now, I think it's really unfair to not give that clear signal at this point. You know, that was brought in to help people through the pandemic. And in my view, we are at the worst point of the pandemic right now. You know, the NHS is struggling as it never has before, and many people are struggling as they never have before. So I think the government could have given a clear signal of support with that, but they didn't take up that opportunity. Hopefully they will in the near future. And this motion is simply expressing our view that these matters need to be looked at, which I think is something that any government should do, and in all likelihood would do. So I think it's very fair for Councillor Martin to put this forward, and I hope that we all support it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Newbury. The motion has been seconded. Is there anyone against the motion? Then that motion's carried. Thank you. Motion 4, I call upon the leader of the Chase Community Independence and Green Group, Councillor Woodhead, to present his motion to Council. Councillor Woodhead.
Thank you, Chair and colleagues. I'm conscious of the time moving on. The motion is as it's presented to you in respect to the potentially bringing in a pilot for the universal basic income. This is a motion that has been passed elsewhere, and I included references for all members in the motion as it's presented. We have heard already a lot of what I was thinking of saying when I was preparing for this has been said already, and it's encouraging that the motions that have already been taken through council are addressing similar issues, and it is around trying to give people stability in life, economic stability that will address some of the economic issues, the poverty issues, the health issues that we've been talking about. And at a time, as it's been a word that's been overused, I guess, but as an unprecedented time, the government has stepped in with an amount of support. As I mentioned in my comments for the last motion, there are also a number of people that haven't been included in that. And any scheme would be imperfect, but it is an opportunity to recognise that we need a system that supports people in the living of their lives. We are a society, we are together, and this is, the universal basic income is a way of addressing that. It is a big change from our current welfare system. So it's not something that we can just say, oh, let's try it and give it a go, or let's evolve what we're doing, or try and change things like they've done in universal credit. It will fundamentally change how we support each other as a society and help those that are trapped in poverty as a way out of that, while also giving everybody I guess the floor that you would fall upon if times are hard. Many members may be aware, a number of years ago, my business failed, and it meant that my income had gone, as well as dealing with the business collapse and the creditors and the employees and all those responsibilities. I had no income for myself. My wife at the time was on incapacity benefit, and because I hadn't paid myself in the business for 2 years, hence I hadn't got national insurance contributions, because I was putting all my money into keeping the business afloat. That meant that my wife's incapacity benefit meant that that was the only income into our household. I wasn't able to get any job seekers allowance or similar sort of support, because that was the case. And as a business owner where that had collapsed and was in quite a difficult place, as many people are in that situation, we only kept our house because we had a 3-month mortgage holiday. And that's sort of where we all have a journey through life. That's sort of where we were at that time. Fortunately, my circumstances have changed and improved to some degree over that period, but I can empathise with businesses that are struggling, with people that have had their income removed over the last few months, and really feel that this is an opportunity to look at a different way of supporting each other as a society. And I really hope that all members will support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Woodhead. Is there a seconder for this motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll second that and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you very much, Councillor Adamson. Councillor Lyons.
Thank you, Chair. Just to begin with, I did actually have my hand up when we talked about whether we were going to vote on the previous motion. I appreciate that's now passed, but for future? Can we give the opportunity before we move on to the second one? So coming back to this motion, thank you, Councillor Woodhead. Sorry, it really threw me the fact that we didn't get the opportunity to vote when my hand was up. So my apologies. With regards to this motion, I completely support ensuring that those that need it most receive adequate support and are well supported. But I feel I've looked into the idea quite a bit, and I feel that it's an oversimplified solution to what is a very complex social and economic problem. I think the bit that concerns me the most is the eye-watering cost when you look at some of the predictions from research done online and research done in other countries, and the fact that actually there's an unknown impact to the job market. So, you know, what impact will it have on productivity and when the incentivizing work. There's no mention, and I think this is the bit that really gets me, there's no mention with regards to cost at all. It's just not being considered. And my fear, in fact, looking into it, it would be astronomical. To be able to implement such a scheme, everyone would have to pay more tax. And I personally feel that voting in favour of this motion would be, in effect, voting for an enormous tax rise, tax hike, that our residents, particularly given the pandemic and the situation, our residents, I wouldn't support that. I don't support increasing taxes for our residents, given, and I think this would require a huge tax rise. My other concerns with regards to the way the motion's presented is it's not clear what form it would take. So having looked at what they've done elsewhere, would universal income replace universal credit? In which case would it would be taking funds from current recipients, which are most in need, to distribute to everybody, regardless of financial need. Would it replace state pension instead? In which case it would be taking it from older generations and redistributing to younger generations, the majority of which are in work. Would it be replacing disability benefits, which will be removing the current support received by people on disability, distributing it to able bodies and those without disabilities. I simply can't support something that potentially neglects the most vulnerable people in our society and fails to acknowledge that in some circumstances, certain individuals need extra support. Moving from a targeted distribution, as is now, to a generalised distribution will inevitably mean that the amount of money that we see reaches the most deserving is much lower. Excluding all of that, the concept fundamentally precludes other government priorities. So such an enormous amount taxpayers' money would be required to fund a universal income. What about schools? What about infrastructure and roads? I feel that it would reduce the scope for further public investment, and healthcare, roads, that would fundamentally. Briefly mentioned trials and pilots that have been done elsewhere, and I've looked into this, and actually very few of payments, as is described in this potential motion. In fact, most trial payments actually UK government poverty line when you look at the amounts. And in the motion, Councillor Woodhead, you referred to a basic cost of living. It's not clear what that would be. If we take that as being the full-time salary of someone on a living wage, that's an average 40-hour week. That's an average of £1,511 a month. So 79,000 in 2019. That's over £119 million each and every month. That's astronomical. Where on earth would the council find that money? Looking at the studies that have been done, the Public Services International, which is a global trade union, so I know a fellow councillor has just commented me about actually, this global trade union analysed the Alaska Permanent Fund, which provides, as you're probably aware, adults and children with a set payment each year, and they actually concluded that made no noticeable reduction to child poverty, and actually it didn't prevent any of income inequalities. So unless the amount that we're talking about is so minimal that it's it leaves no fiscal space to improve and expand current services. So it makes me question what is the council looking to achieve with this?
I didn't get that.
We talk about Finland, which paid £269 a month to 2,000 people.
I found this on the web before we talked about
sorry. And Helsinki University, actually, yes, they said it increased life satisfaction, but it didn't incentivise people to work. Canada then rejected a similar proposal on expense, and Switzerland voted by a significant majority to reject a universal basic income, which was an unconditional one, as is proposed today. I know it mentions briefly Jeremy Corbyn considered it previously. I know since then Keir Starmer has rejected the idea, and in December Labour's Shadow Chancellor, Annalise Dodds, definitively ruled out advocating a universal basic income, stating it wouldn't work. So I think my concerns there is, in reality, this scheme would deepen divides and make a problem worse. We should be investing in, Public Services International, which again, I've done some research into this. They said that the money required to support a basic income scheme will be better spent reforming social protection and better public services. And I agree with that. And I think, that's what we need for Cannock Chase. We need to support our residents and look at what we can do to help them and not increase tax to this, this is astronomical.
Thank you very much. I've got 7 people that want to speak on this item. Councillor starting.
Hey, Chair, Councillor Adamson referenced earlier this evening about creating jobs in the district to lift people from poverty. The introduction of a UBI scheme removes the incentive for people to work, and this reduction of incentive to work leads to fewer people in work, a drop in GDP, higher unemployment, increases in mental and physical well-being problems, and ultimately a slowdown in growth. The introduction of a UBI could see the lowest productivity contributors losing their jobs due to automation within those industries, which, while that would see an increase in GDP per capita, it causes fundamental economic problems. The cost of such a program would be monumental. We saw in the US election race, before it turned into the total farce, the Democrat candidate, Andrew Yang, put forward a UBI proposal of $1,000 freedom dividend, a delightfully US liberal expression, that carried a monumental cost of $2.8 trillion every year. That is 60% of the US budget, and that is before the coronavirus problem. The increase of money and the purchasing power that it provides could very well contribute to rising inflation. In real terms, this could very well further and exacerbate the problem that UBI seeks to resolve, which could contribute to further spiraling costs of such a program. I've already alluded to the enormous costs involved, and we are currently, as we have all acknowledged at great length over the last 10 months, we are in this pandemic that is brutally impacting everyone. We have a furlough scheme that costs around £15 billion a week to maintain. We have spoken at length today about pensions, quite rightly. We have spoken about pensions. We've declared a poverty emergency and discussed statutory sick pay. We also need to acknowledge the monumental taxes that are going to be required from my generation, and I know I look older than I am, but I am only 31. From my generation, I had a tough paper around, Councillor Anderson. We are going to have to pay enormous taxes. And while I appreciate that the baby boom generation had to pay for the war, my father reminds me of this on a daily basis, adding the crippling cost of a UBI scheme on top of this would see the British economy crippled to Weimar Germany standards. Councillor Woodhead earlier mentioned that the statutory sick pay increase was going to be a big amount of money. That pales into insignificance compared to what a UBI scheme it would cost. I vehemently oppose this motion and encourage all of my fellow members to oppose this motion as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Muckley.
Thank you, Chair. I fully support the motion, and I vehemently disagree with my colleagues, Councillor Startin and Councillor Lyons, and I'll tell you why. We've been talking about poverty today. We all know that there is a stigma attached to poverty. There is shame attached to poverty. And the UBI offers an opportunity for people to not feel shamed, to not be stigmatized by poverty. What was needed now is a long-term trial to see, how we could benefit from this. Giving people money allows people to plan for the future, which is something, let's be honest, that only middle and upper class people can do. People that we've been talking about today with regard to poverty, emergency and the low statutory sick pay, they can't financially plan for the future. They can't put money aside for a rainy day. Or maybe if they've got a really good idea for a business, how are they going to get the money together to be able to do that? We are missing out on innovators, entrepreneurs, because they simply are in the wrong social stratosphere. They're just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they haven't got enough money to put their ideas forward. I think the idea of UBI realistically is to create a humane floor under which nobody can fall, a floor under which nobody has to starve or freeze. We see quite often people talking about, well, I could eat, or I could put the heating on. So I think I'll just put an extra 5 jumpers on and maybe I'll be able to afford to eat. And that's not a society that I want to live in. That's not the society that I want for ward residents, for the district, for the whole country. We are a rich country. Why are people living in poverty? Why are children living in poverty in this country? And there's no good reason for it. Now, UBI, it is a radical idea. Councillor Lyons talked about that there have been a few experiments in it. The Canadian one in the 1970s, they raised the income if you were below that level, and that meant there was a higher increase they found in well-being. That is something that we have been talking about on and on as a result of this pandemic. The well-being of our residents is diminished. It has really been harmed. It was harmed before, and it's harmed even more now. We need to be looking at well-being. Also, they found lower levels of hospital admissions. That's got to be a good thing. It's got to save money for our NHS. It's got to mean that people don't have to have their £96 statutory sick pay. And it's got to mean that they're happier in work, to be able to go in and not be unwell, not have to go to work unwell. So, there's a lot less to stress about. They found that children were staying in school for longer. With regard to the Finland experiment, they found that there were increases in well-being, even if you were unemployed. And we find that people that are long-term unemployed have significant harm done to their mental health, to their emotional well-being. And so to increase their well-being has only got to be a good thing. And there is simply, I know that it's been bandied around today, but it is ingenuous to say that just because you're giving someone some money means they will not go to work. Why is it okay to say that about the poorest in our community? Well, if you give them a little bit of money, they're not going to work. They're just going to want to take the money from the state. And I think
Point of
that's
order,
unkind.
Chair, that isn't what I said. I said it reduces the incentive to work.
But that's not what the studies have found. That's the trouble. And the way that it comes across is that we're, essentially saying that people won't work because they've got this income from the government. And it's just not been borne out in the pilots that have taken place. The Scotland plan trial, they're looking into it, and they're going to use central government funds, but it doesn't mean that you always have to use central government funds. So both Councillor Lyons and Councillor Startin mentioned monumental costs, eye-watering costs, astronomical costs. And Councillor Lyons mentioned that the poorest in our community would be taxed. And again, that the way that UBI is run is our decision. we, you know, us as a country would decide how it's funded. It doesn't have to be funded in one particular way. For example, in America, they were talking about rises to taxes in the tech industry. You could perhaps raise taxes for the highest earners in our country. There's a novel idea. We could do all these different things. There are different ways to fund. And the idea of UBI is that it becomes a circular economy, because if people are in work, people are being entrepreneurial, people are being innovative, the money goes back into the community. So that money isn't just sitting in that person's bank account, it's going into the community, it's helping the poorest of our community, it's helping everyone. We could look to the fact, of course, that we've had massive payouts to the banks in the last recession. You know, if there is there's a recession going on right now, do we give all that money to the banks again, or do we give it to the people that are struggling? If we give it to the people, it will end up in the banks anyway. You know, that's the idea. We put the money into our businesses, we put the money into our services, and that money then eventually gets back to the bank. So I can certainly see a lot of positives with UBI. You know, if we look at things like, as I was saying, you know, the reduction in hospital costs, the reduction in homelessness fees, people just simply being homeless, the police, you know, they spend a lot of money on people that are on the lowest level of income, whether it be homelessness or many other issues that are predominantly suffered by those of a lower income. And, you know, if we're saving money in those ways on our public sector, again, that's got to be a good thing. We've got to think about this as an idea rather than simply saying it can't be done, it's going to cost too much money. Let's turn that on its head. Let's think, well, actually, I want everyone in my ward, in my district, in the country to not be going to the local food bank for a loaf of bread. That's what I would like. I would like to empower people in the UK to be able to live the life they want to lead, to be able to have financial security, to have, you know, all the sorts of things that people from a middle and upper class background take for granted. And I don't think that's a terrible idea. I think, you know, we need to be looking at how could we achieve this, not simply saying it can't be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, I'll just say to Council, I've got 9 more speakers on this one. I'll start with Councillor Whitten.
Mr. Chairman, can I speak? Can I move that the question be put? Because they seem to be going well away from the substance of the motion. And I think the question should be now put. I move it.
Is that seconded, Chairman?
I'll second that, Chair.
Well, hang on. Yeah, right. So I'll ask Councillor Whitten.
Chairman, there's been a motion that the question now be put. It's been seconded. We should take a vote on whether the question should be put.
It's been seconded. Are there any objections?
Yes.
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 Right, so we'll go to the vote then. All those in favour of the motion?
Unfortunately, Chairman, I think we have to go through alphabetically.
Definitely.
I've had 1 or 2 saying they're abstaining and others. So
Chairman, we're going to have to read each member in alphabetical order to say whether they're for the question being put now, against or abstain.
Yes, yeah, alphabetical order.
Right, so this is a vote on whether the question be now put in the first instance. Yes. Councillor Adamson.
Against.
Councillor Alcott.
Adamson's against, his party's against. Don't behave. If that is
Councillor Orcott.
he's voted against the rest of
You're
I'm trying to get on.
Will you stop talking, please, and mute your microphones while we're trying to check a vote? Councillor Adamson's done what he's done, and that's it.
No, Councillor Orcott.
You're on mute.
I'm sorry, Councillor Orcott, I didn't catch that. You're on mute.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Allen?
For.
Councillor Bennett? Thank you. Councillor Booker?
Against, sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Buttery?
Against.
Councillor Cartwright?
Against.
Councillor Crabtree?
Forgive me, I don't know what I'm voting for. Are we voting to carry on the debate?
No, you're voting for the question to be put, for the motion to be put.
If I say I'm against that, then that means I'm voting for the debate to carry on, yes?
Yes, that's right.
Against, please. Thank
Against.
you.
Okay. Councillor Davis?
For.
4, thank you. Councillor Dudson?
For.
Councillor Dunnett?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher is absent. Councillor Fitzgerald?
Against.
Councillor Freeman?
Against.
Councillor Hewitt?
Against.
Councillor Hughes?
Against.
Councillor Johnson? Justin Johnson, sorry.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Johnson?
For.
Councillor Brian Jones?
Against.
Councillor Val Jones? Councillor Val Jones?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Corgellis?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Layton?
I need to abstain.
Okay. Councillor Lyons?
Against.
Councillor Martin?
For.
Councillor Mitchell?
Against, sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Montague?
Against.
Councillor Muckley?
Against.
Councillor Newbury?
Against.
Councillor Pearson?
Against.
Councillor Priest?
Against.
Councillor Smith?
Against.
Councillor
Sorry,
Starton?
that's a majority against, Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
The debate continues, Chairman.
Yes, no problem. Right, I'll start again. As I said, we've got 9 callers. Councillor Whitten. Councillor Whitten.
Can you hear me now, Chair?
Yeah, I can now, yeah.
Thank you. I believe there should be a universal basic income. There's been too much poverty and inequality. And I think this would help people out of the poverty trap. A good way to make it affordable would be to put corporation tax back up to 28% and stop the huge tax breaks given to the super rich. Because the money has not been spent on productivity, consumers or workers. Most of it appears to have gone in offshore bank accounts. It is not the working man that has messed this country up. It is uncontrolled capitalism. They do as they like, and the rest of us are expected to put up with it. We need a return to Keynesian economics in this country. Thank you for that, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hewitt.
Well, thank you. I don't think it'll be a secret that I'll disagree with the previous speaker. And I have some concerns about this anyway, but I'm not going to spend ages just repeating what Councillor Lyons has already said. So there's no point in that. But one of the challenges I have is just the lack of any kind of costing of this. like Councillor Lyons and like a number of our councillors, I did spend some time looking at it. But any indication of how much this would cost, any indication of how much this would be paid for, any indication of the level of tax burden would have been fantastic. It would have really helped. Any summary of all the links that we sent would have been so useful. In the end, it's just a sort of bit of a wish list without any responsibility. So no, I won't be supporting this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Newbury.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Listening to the arguments from the leader of the opposition on, what will this mean for affordability, what will this mean for the job market, I felt like I was back in the late 90s when MPs were debating the minimum wage, and then hearing the deputy leader of the opposition speak, that took me back even further to the late 40s when the Conservative Party opposed the cost of the welfare state and the NHS. I mean, would they oppose the minimum wage, the welfare state and the NHS today? No, of course they wouldn't, because they eventually came to accept that they worked and had a high level of public support. I think we all know that the pandemic is going to reset our economy in many ways, many of which we can't even foresee yet. And following the pandemic, we also know there are other huge changes that are coming down the track, including automation, which could well make many jobs redundant. And I think off the back of that, we need to rethink many aspects of our country, which could include transformational change, such as the creation of the welfare state was in the 40s. And it's clear that, the idea of a UBI isn't a completely flat thing, that's it, take it or leave it. You could have top-ups for those in need of additional support, like disabled people. But I think the point I really want to make is many speakers that we've heard tonight are not seeing the bigger picture of this. Huge amounts of money could be saved from no longer having to means test. And think about the additional benefits of scrapping things like the inhumane fit for work assessments. I mean, I have a relative who's got multiple sclerosis, and he was diagnosed more than 10 years ago, and he's recently been told he's fit to work, even though he's absolutely not able to hold down a full-time job, and sadly his condition is deteriorating right now. And that a UBI would also have huge benefits for other public services, as other speakers have alluded to, and the wider economy, and childhood development, which all of those benefits we can't even calculate sitting here today. And wouldn't that be better than paying billions to private contractors who are mates of the government, or indeed boosting a bank's balance sheet whilst they then refuse assistance to ordinary people? It could be made proportionate to the cost of living in the UK, which can be assessed in many, many ways. And there are very bright people in our universities who've already been working on this for many years. It can be tailored to suit our country. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And I wanted to say that I completely agree with the really impassioned speech we had from Councillor Muckley. We need to end the stigma of poverty, of benefits, and the impossible choices that millions of people are having to make in this country right now. We're not asking for this district council to do this. The motion's asking to write to the Secretary of State. And earlier tonight, the opposition was stressing the harmlessness of just writing to the trustees of the Mine Workers Pension Scheme. Well, then what's the harm of writing to the Secretary of State, asking them to look into this? I think I completely agree with the content of this motion. I think it's something that we definitely should consider as a country, because we've got some big transformational change coming in this country, and we need to tailor our welfare state and our assistance for the neediest accordingly. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Justin Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. This motion makes me very nervous because of the fact that it's not costed, and I don't care what everybody else says. You can't vote for something unless it's properly costed. You have no idea what it's going to cost. It's like signing an open checkbook. You wouldn't run a business with an open checkbook because you just tell how much you're going to spend. So I've got to vote against it. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brian Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had a lively debate today, an excellent motion put forward by the leader, Councillor Adamson, supported by Councillor Newbury. They both articulated extremely well, as they always do in this chamber, as to why we should support that motion. And this side of the chamber, we're in full support of that. This motion now, we're not talking about whether we support poverty or not. None of us want poverty. I grew up in poverty. I know what it's like. But what we're talking about is ideology. Now, I could go on about what everybody else has said, but I'll say just this. If Jeremy Corbyn was looking at it and Keir Starmer has rejected it, it's so far to the left. Is this what Councillor Woodhead, I'm sure it's well-meaning, but is he seriously saying now that he's moved so far to the left that that's what he's all about? This would bankrupt the country. And at the end of the day, everything has to be paid for and people have to pay for it. The working person has to pay for that, whether they're on minimum wage or however much they earn. It's well-intentioned. Councillor Newbury mentioned about seeing the bigger picture. I'd suggest that's the trouble with the people who are for it. You're not seeing the bigger picture. It would cause havoc, absolute havoc, and I'm strongly against it. Although I'm in favour of reducing poverty at every opportunity. This is not that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Priest.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to speak on one aspect that was brought up about the how it reduces the incentive to work. Now, I've got an issue with that because some of the lowest paid jobs that you get are some of the ironically least desirable, but also there's some of the ones that people most desperately have to get because people are desperate to put food on their table, like they said, to warm themselves and things like that. I think a universal basic income would actually incentivize people to actually get the jobs they want rather than the jobs that they necessarily have to have just to keep food on the table. So I would disagree with that. It gives an opportunity for people to better themselves with no pressure on working 24 hours a day just to get by. There's also an argument to be made about UBI, and arguments have been made by the people who propose this, is that it actually, as more people don't go for the lower paid jobs, it actually means that the jobs become less desirable, and it can lead to these kind of jobs getting better paid. So when employers are desperate to get certain jobs filled, sometimes they can get away with low pay because so many people want to have them because they're desperate for the money to put food on the table. So I would say that the less desire for these kind of jobs would force the employers to pay better wages for some of the most low paid jobs.
Thank you to Councillor Priest. Councillor Robert Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. I disagree with this motion. As has been said before, this would place an enormous burden on the government in terms of financing it. That can only be achieved through a massive hike in taxation. And that will be felt by the residents of this district, and that's not in their best interest. In order, just to address something that Councillor Muckley said earlier in the debate, she said that we're a wealthy country and we should be able to afford it. But wealth isn't static. Wealth is created and needs to be constantly recreated. And in order to do that, you need a strong economy. And you don't get a strong economy by burdening it with high taxation. We need to be a competitive economy, and this does not make us competitive. Its aim is to reduce poverty, but it would make the entire country poorer and our residents worse for it. So I strongly disagree with the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Crabtree.
Thank you. Just take my hand down. Yeah, I just wanted to say that now is the time that we need to consider more radical ideas. In the wake of the pandemic, millions are unemployed. Most industries are struggling. this is the wake-up call we need to make sure that people are not falling through the cracks of our society. I believe that UBI is the key to tackling these. We can tackle the technological unemployment that people are talking about, and automation. We can support unpaid care workers. We can expand the middle classes while eliminating the need for social security. And I want to address this point of incentivizing people not to work. I think perhaps councillors are speaking for themselves when they say that, but for us, the sort of, well, for people in lower paid jobs, I think what it will give them is job freedom. They will not be forced to be stuck in a job that they hate, that's dragging them down and hurting their well-being, because they can look for something else that perhaps pays a little less, but makes them happier. The people that will be incentivized are employers, so they can make their jobs more attractive to keep people from just going to find somewhere else. Also, I've been doing a bit of research on this. Everyone's talking about cost. According to some research that I've done in the last week or so, for the whole country, it would cost around 50 billion a week. And I did also read a quote from Boris Johnson last year saying that universal basic income was one of the many things that the government were looking at as a way of tackling the issues raised by COVID. That's all I'm going to say, other than I hope you'll all support our motion, or Paul Woodhead's motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Booker.
Thank you, Chair. Just by virtue of being last, I think everyone's pretty much made the points I was going to make. I would say that, like the other councillors, I'm vehemently against this. It doesn't make sense to me. The costing is a massive red flag to me. I mean, we had mentions of being against the minimum wage or being against unemployment. These have conditions attached. The minimum wage is about earning enough to survive, or unemployment is about keeping food on the table whilst you're looking for work. There are conditions. UBI is, in essence, giving more and more money with less and less conditions attached to it. And I don't see how this fixes the problem. I mean, we mentioned the Finnish study that well-being was increased, which, you know, arguably, if I'm being crude, well, you've just been given some money. Interestingly enough, the study didn't see a massive change in the unemployment figures, which is perhaps what Councillor Starton was talking about when he says a disincentive to work. I won't go over everything that's already been said. It's already been said, other than to say that I too would encourage everyone to vote against this motion. I think the idea is admirable, a big solution for a big problem, but it's not thought through. The minute you get into it, it presents more problems, more issues than it arguably solves. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Booker. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of what I wanted to say has already been said, so I won't repeat it. But I welcome this motion. It has been said that it would bankrupt this country. This government is bankrupting this country, Chair, by throwing money to all of this government's friends. Billions wasted. This country, the economy will be dead. By the time they've finished throwing money away left, right and centre, it could be dead. Something like this will reboost the economy, Chair. It'll get the economy going again. We need it. It's not going to... Councillor Lyons, I believe, said when she spoke ages ago that this council would never be able to afford it. This council hasn't got to afford anything. It's the government who will be paying it. And I don't know what members are missing in the actual motion. They're talking about it's not costed. Well, it's what it's asking for. It's calling for a fully evaluated pilot. Evaluated means costed. So I just don't... I wish they'd read what's in front of them before they could start making these comments, Chair. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tony Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this motion does strike very much at the heart of Conservative philosophy, and I think we have to recognise that. That's fair enough. What it also does is, I'm not professional. I have no professional qualification. However, I am educated and I do know the benefits of Keynesian economics. And I do know that within a generation, we could be, this could be making money for this country rather than losing money for this country. Prior to the last election, we had the Conservative argument that Jeremy Corbyn's Labour government would bankrupt the country with his spending proposals. Far more money has already been spent due to the COVID outbreak than was proposed in the Labour manifesto, and the country still isn't bankrupted. Now, there are government spending decisions which can be made, and uplift in government spending is one of them. Let's just give you a historical example. What's something I do know a little bit about. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal in 1930s America required an uplift in excess of 17% of government spending, an extra 17% of government spending to get that country and thereby the world economy out of depression, not recession, depression. It succeeded. It was aided and abetted by the war, I might add, but it succeeded. This type of investment, as Councillor Crabtree has mentioned and Councillor Martin has mentioned, we are at a fundamental rock bottom. We have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to do what is right by the citizens of Cannock Chase and the citizens of the countries of the island. I am fully in support of the motion, Chair. And I think the reason why I move that the question be put, because the leader of the CHIPS proposed it, the leader of the Labour group proposed it, and the vote itself has probably never been in doubt since that very moment. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Adamson.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'll be fairly brief. Make the point where this motion is asking for a pilot scheme, a fully evaluated pilot scheme. So the Conservative has said how much it's going to cost. The whole scheme would be evaluated before it's put in. Chairman, anyone ever applied for benefits realise what a minefield it is. It's difficult at a time of crisis. People are put through this minefield of difficult ways to get any money at all. Universal basic income would remove that minefield and fits in actually very well with my earlier motion, which everyone thankfully supported. Our community here in Cannock Chase isn't immune from any pandemic, isn't immune from the economic crisis. And putting our district, not the whole country, our district forward as a fully evaluated pilot scheme for this sounds to me like a pretty good idea. It'll improve living standards in our district. We're in a very deprived area. What's wrong with that? National security is critical to a prosperous community, as it says in the motion. To say it's a local scheme to affect our district. It's been said for the Conservatives for time after time, we need to keep things local. This is keeping things as local as you can get. This is for Cannock Chase. It's aware to poverty. It provides a proper safety net, helping those who need it most. A pilot scheme would show the true cost, and then if it works, it'll be rolled out nationally. This government and previous governments have run lots of pilot schemes for policies in the past, over the past 20, 30 years. Lots of governments do pilot schemes. I think Mrs. Thatcher ran a pilot scheme for the poll tax in Scotland, as I recall, a long time ago. She's then ignored the results, but that's another matter. So, and this present government has also run pilot schemes. I really don't see the problem. This would bring money into our income, into our district, raise the standards of living of our people. We've had lots of scare stories from Councillor Lyons, for example, how much it's going to cost, taxation through the roof. That has been dealt with very adequately. And I will recall one of my colleagues, I forgot to said it earlier, about the Conservatives in the 1940s opposed the NHS, partly on the basis that it would cost so much. And the Tory amendment to the National Health Service Bill, which I have in front of me, opposed the approval of the bill because it would discourage voluntary effort and association, mutilates the structure of local government, dangerously increases military power and patronage, and appropriates trusts, funds and benefactions in contempt of the wishes of donors and subscribers, and undermines freedom. I think a lot of people would say the NHS does just the opposite. It gives people freedom. The Conservatives in 1948 opposed it. It cost too much. They didn't want it. It was too radical. This is a radical scheme. Let's run a pilot scheme. Let's run it here in Cannock Chase. See if it works for the benefit of our residents. And that's what we're looking for. If it works, it's going to reduce NHS demand, save money. It's going to improve educational performance because, as we said earlier, if you're poor, your performance is generally going to be less unless you're very, very lucky. It's going to make people get into better jobs and then start paying taxes as well. It could well be a win-win situation that could pay for itself. So I will be supporting the motion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Adamson. I am now going to put this motion 4 to the vote.
Councillor Chairman, Councillor Woodhead would have a right of reply if he wishes
Would
to
you like
exercise.
a right to reply, Councillor Woodhead?
I'll just take a couple of points, if I may, Chair. I'm conscious that this has been very well debated, and I thank everybody for their contributions, although vehemently I disagree with some of them, capturing what's been said elsewhere. I just wanted to pick out a couple of things, is that this would give our district front and centre of addressing poverty, dealing with the motion that that Councillor Adamson brought earlier in the meeting that everybody supported. It isn't the targeted system that was brought in the 1940s was what was needed at the time. This is what we need now. This is about being on the right side of history. It's not about being left or far left or right. It's about moving forward. It's about having a future and understanding how this works. So it moves out of an academic environment and into something that impacts positively on people's lives is really important. I think talk about paying the living wage. The reality is that the national minimum wage or national living wage, as Councillor Newbury picked up earlier, is below a real living wage, which essentially means that we are paying for people to be at work, which is corporate welfare. Now, we might pay it to the individual, but it's about allowing employers to pay people less than it costs them to live on. And it will make a difference to the distribution of wealth. We are a rich country, and whilst it's to some degree not surprising that the Conservative group are against this, it is disappointing, but they're protecting the wealth of those that are born with wealth, of those other than those that will have the opportunity to work and sustain their families appropriately. So I could go on, but I think there's been many notes on both sides, and I thank those members that have spoken in support of this motion and trust that it will go through with the support of the full council. Thank you, Chair.
Right then, we'll go to the vote.
Simple name vote then, for or against the motion. Councillor Adamson.
For.
Councillor Orcott.
For.
Councillor Allen.
For.
Councillor Bennett. So Councillor Bennett. Thank you. Councillor Booker.
Against.
Councillor Buttery.
Against.
Councillor Cartwright.
For.
Councillor Crabtree.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Davis. Sorry, Councillor Davis, you're on mute.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Dodson.
For.
Councillor Dunnett.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher is not here. Councillor Fitzgerald.
Against.
Councillor Freeman.
Against.
Councillor Hewitt.
Against.
Councillor Hughes.
Against.
Councillor Justin Johnson.
Against, please.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Johnson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Brian Jones.
Against.
Councillor Val Jones. Councillor Val Jones.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Crojalis.
For.
Councillor Layton.
And I need to abstain.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lyons.
Against.
Councillor Martin.
For.
Councillor Mitchell.
For.
Councillor Molyneux.
For.
Councillor Muckley.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Newbury.
100% for.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson.
For.
Councillor Priest.
For.
Councillor Smith.
Against.
Councillor Startin.
Very much against, please, Steve.
Thank you. Councillor Stretton.
For.
Councillor Sutherland.
100% against.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton.
Against.
Councillor Thompson.
Please.
Sorry?
Against, please.
Thank you. Councillor Todd.
Definitely for.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkinson.
An enthusiastic for, please.
Thank you. And Councillor Whitton.
200% for.
Councillor Woodhead.
I can't be that, so I'll just be for, please.
Thank you. (23-4). That's carried.
Thank you very much. Item 10 on the
Chairman, sorry, can I pause you for a second? Obviously, we're in novel times and we're trying our best to support virtual meetings here. Sometimes we do have to have a little check of how proceedings are going. Now, in the motion 3, the one immediately prior to this, we've had a lot of indication from members who struggled to unmute themselves when you were asking whether we needed a vote or not. So it's unclear to me what the vote actually is, and we need to make sure any decision we make is transparent and democratic. So my advice would be that we take a vote on motion 3.
Fire away then.
Okay, so this is on motion 3, which was the TUC motion, if you like. Councillor Adamson.
For.
Councillor Orcott.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
For.
Councillor Bennett. Councillor Bennett. Is that a 4?
I can hear a 4.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Booker.
Abstain.
Okay. Councillor Buttery.
Abstain, please.
Councillor Cartwright.
For.
Councillor Crabtree.
For.
Councillor Davis.
For.
Councillor Dodson.
For.
Councillor Dunnett.
For.
Councillor Fisher's not here. Councillor Fitzgerald.
Abstain.
Councillor Freeman.
Abstain.
Councillor Hewitt.
Abstain.
Councillor Hughes.
Abstain, please.
Thank you. Councillor Justin Johnson.
Steve, I will say the weather
Sorry,
is.
did you say me? I can't hear it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Councillor.
Outside.
Oh, yeah, okay. Councillor Justin Johnson.
Yeah, abstain, please.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Johnson. Councillor Tony Johnson.
You're on mute, Tony.
Disappeared now.
Weather's really bad over here, Steve.
It is bad.
Okay.
You're still on mute, Tony.
Or has he come back? Councillor Tony Johnson.
He's talking, but he's on mute.
Tony, you're on mute.
Signalling 4 with his fingers.
Is he? Okay. Thank you. Well spotted. Councillor Brian Jones.
Abstain.
Councillor Val Jones.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Craigillis.
For.
Councillor Layton.
Abstain.
Councillor Lyons.
Abstain.
Councillor Martin.
For.
Councillor Mitchell.
Oh.
Councillor Molyneux.
For.
Councillor Muckley.
For.
Councillor Newbury.
For.
Councillor Pearson.
For.
Councillor Priest.
For.
Councillor Smith.
Abstain.
Councillor Startin.
Abstain, please.
Councillor Stretton.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Sutherland.
Abstain, please, Steve.
Councillor Sutton.
Abstain.
Councillor Thompson.
Abstain, please.
Councillor Todd,
4.
Councillor Wilkinson,
4.
Councillor Whitton,
4.
Councillor Woodhead.
4.
That's carried then. There's nobody against.
Thank you. Item 10 on the agenda. Comments and questions on part 1 minutes of the Cabinet committees, subcommittees and panels under Rule 9. A question has been submitted under Rule 9 by Councillor Woodhead. I call upon Councillor Woodhead to ask his question.
Right, just unmute myself, thank you, Chair. This relates to the Cabinet minutes on the 10th of December, recommendations referred from Council, minute number 61. Could the portfolio leader please give the Council an update on progress regarding the strategic review of all boardwalks and footbridges in the district, please?
Thank you. I now call upon the Culture and Sport portfolio leader, Councillor Christine Mitchell, to respond.
Chair, it's Councillor Alcott's portfolio who's responding.
Is he? Councillor Alcott.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Council officers are working towards completing an assessment of all footbridges by the end of March 2021. Once the assessment is complete, a report of their findings will be submitted to a Cabinet meeting by the summer of 2021. The report will include recommendations and costing action plan for implementation, subject to funding being made available. Currently, there are no budgets set aside specifically for replacing these bridges. These timescales and budget situation are as outlined in the response to a petition sent back in October 2020. Whilst that petition specifically related to a request to replace a footbridge removed from Anglesey Nature Reserve in July 2020, the response has also mentioned the wider picture in relation to footbridges in general. That's the answer, Chairman.
Has Councillor Woodhead got a supplementary question to ask?
Yes, please, Chair. I'll make it brief. I'm aware of time galloping on. These choices, as we're all aware, are about choices and priorities. But this council, at our last meeting, asked for this to be prioritised, and it's disappointing that the Cabinet hasn't taken that on board to accelerate the timescales based on the wish of this council. I just wonder, because the meeting that this was held against, the Cabinet meeting where it was discussed, I just wondered, one, if the portfolio leader could give us an indication of the breadth and depth of that debate for the 3 items that were mentioned, which was the Anglesey Nature Reserve, the boardwalk, and a bridge in Rawnsley, as well as 9 others that had been identified. And just finding something that in the minutes for the meeting that we decided that we were expecting an accelerated approach to this. So I'm just wondering if you can just explain why what discussion the Cabinet had and why that wasn't accelerated along with the wishes of this council from our last meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Alcott.
Thank you, Chairman. I got the gist of what it was, but in answer to Councillor Woodhead's supplementary question, yes, the Cabinet members did discuss this item at the Cabinet meeting. And when we asked officers about progressing this issue, the answer was the question of staffing for a start. We haven't got a great number of staffing to do this, and we need specialists as well to give us this advice and the financial costs in it. And it's because of that and because of other priorities which we had and which the council had also agreed to expedite, it was a question of which one do you do? And the council had said, we have got to do this one first, and then we have to look at the others after. So it's a question of priorities, and the cabinet agreed to certain priorities, and this was not one of those. So that's why it's where it is.
Thank you very much, Councillor Alcott. I now move on to item 11. A very welcome statement, and I hope it doesn't take more than 2 minutes. A review of the members' allowances scheme. Report of the council solicitor and monitoring officer, item 11.1 to 11.18. I call upon the leader of the council, Councillor Adamson, to move the recommendations contained in the report.
Thank you, Chairman. Members have the recommendations of the independent panel before them, which recommends a freeze in members' allowances. I'm going to say I fully support this. It would be wrong for us to take an increase at a time when many of our staff are facing a freeze. This council has frozen allowances many times over the last few years, and there was a couple of years when we had small increases. I think now is the time again for a further freeze. It's morally right that so we should do so. It would certainly be wrong for us to give ourselves an increase, and I move that we freeze the allowances.
I second this, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lyons. I'm hoping this is going to stay empty. Are there any comments? No. Is there anyone against the recommendations? Then the recommendations are carried. Now, I'd like to say to the rest of the council, a Happy New Year.
Thank you, Chair.
It'll be like it, but it's there. Anyway, have a safe journey home.